Call the Camarillo City Council special meeting for June 17th to order, please. And I'm going to ask Ms. Madeline if you take the roll, please.
Councilmember Santangelo. Here. Councilmember Molche.
Present.
Councilmember Craven.
Here.
Mayor Tremblay. Here. Mayor Kildee.
Here. Mr. Tremblay, would you lead us in the flag salute tonight?
Certainly. Please join me. Place your right hand over your heart. Begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, amendments to the agenda.
There are no amendments to the agenda.
Gets us down to departmental. The first is, Councilor, do you have an announcement regarding the June 12th meeting?
Yes, I do. I want to announce that at the City Council meeting on June 12th of 2019, that there was a closed session at which the Council considered the initiation of litigation. The Council did authorize the initiation of litigation in that meeting, and I want to further announce that the particulars with regard to that litigation in terms of the name of the defendant and the circumstances surrounding the action will be available upon request after the action is filed. And that's the end of the announcement.
That gets us down to item B. It's a proposed lease agreement for the Camarillo Ranch Foundation. Do we have a staff report on that, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, we'll have two presentations this evening. The first from Carmen Nichols, and then following her, the city attorney.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the City Council. My presentation will be a background of the proposed lease agreement with the Camarillo Ranch Foundation, and then we'll turn it over to the city attorney, and he will describe then the responsibilities under that proposed agreement. So the Camarillo Ranch the Camarillo Ranch House was established in 1998. This was after the city received and established the 4.42 acre parcel that was deeded to the city at that time. This property contains the Camarillo Ranch House and other structures. The City Council envisioned that in order to provide the maximum benefit to the community, the property would be used for historical educational purposes, community events, and commercial uses. The then City Council recognized that the revenue generated from community events and commercial uses, such as venue rentals for weddings and private parties, would not be sufficient to cover the entire cost of the operations and maintenance, including educational programming, preservation, and restoration. They envisioned the need for private donations and fundraising, and thereby created the Camarillo Ranch Foundation, a nonprofit 501c3. And so that was formed under City Council authority in 1998. Now, because of its formation under City Council authority, it is subject to the Brown Act. And the foundation then became responsible for the property management, the operations and maintenance, the preservation and upgrading of the property, also for creating and providing for historical and educational programming, and for hosting community events and fundraising. The city and the Camarillo Ranch Foundation have been operating under the current agreement since November 5th of 2008, and one of the core functions as described in that agreement is to preserve and maintain the property as a historic site and transform it into a focal point of the community for educational enrichment and enjoyment and exhibit diversity and culture of the city. Listed before you are responsibilities of each of the organizations under the current operating agreement. Now, this is a summary of those responsibilities. You can find additional information and additional specific duties in the operating agreement. The CRF responsibilities and funding opportunities include operations. Under operations, they provide these services with staff, with volunteers, and with docents. Under operations, they do provide venue rental and commercial uses. Again, those are weddings, private events, could be filming permits. Community events and fundraising. Our well-renowned Throwback Thursdays is an example of community event where there is an opportunity for doing some fundraising. And lastly, under operations, educational, historical, and cultural activities and programs, such as the school tours and the exhibits, the ranch house, and its artifacts within. The CRF is also responsible for maintenance. They have been responsible for the maintenance of the grounds and fencing. They've been responsible for the maintenance of the interior refurbishing and preservation of the ranch house and other structures and furnishings. Revenue opportunities for the Camarillo Ranch Foundation include venue rentals, commercial uses, and service commissions. These service commissions basically are agreements that they may have for the private parties, such as the catering and other services. They also have been fundraising, have memberships, and of course private donations, not listed, but that is also a source of revenue, is private donations. Under the current operating agreement, the city's responsibilities also include maintenance, the exterior of the ranch house, the barn, and other accessory structures. The city also has provided a disability access, or ADA, and capital improvements, and also parking lots, which is one of the most recent projects there at the Camarillo Ranch property. The city's revenue opportunities, well, it's, I guess the funding, I shouldn't say really revenue opportunity, but it's offset by general fund, these maintenance obligations. The city manager received a letter from the foundation dated April 3rd, 2019, and since then discussions have ensued with the ad hoc committee. The foundation's letter requested that the ad hoc committee review the current agreement, the operating agreement, and that it was concerned about self-sufficiency, that it was a challenge for them to pursue event funding to preserve the property, and then at the same time making Camarillo Ranch a focal point of the community. The foundation requested, and the foundation's request was for the ad hoc committee to look at this agreement, but also told the ad hoc committee that it was willing to continue to operate as prescribed in the agreement, meaning that it would continue to provide the venue rentals, the commercial uses, educational and cultural historical programming. The foundation said that it would utilize revenue that is otherwise used for maintenance to expand educational programming. So in order to expand that, it would need the revenue that it otherwise then uses for the maintenance. They requested that the city review the opportunity of it taking over all maintenance responsibilities in order for it to do so. They also requested that the ad hoc committee look at the city of Carlsbad's Leo Carrillo Ranch. And the city of Carlsbad's Leo Carrillo Ranch has a model in which, very similarly, is a historic land site that is used for venue rentals and is also used for historical programming, education, and tours. Well, when the ad hoc committee reviewed this, it also looked at the city's additional obligations under this request, that the city would require additional general fund obligations for the increased maintenance. So there's a cost to the maintenance. That there would be no offset of revenue as prescribed under the establishment of the property and the foundation. So there's no offset for the maintenance requirements that the city would take on if then the revenue would go directly to the foundation. That venue rentals, community events, and other uses create a high impact on the maintenance needs. Like the Carlsbad model, the revenue generation should go to offsetting impacts and ongoing maintenance and preservation property. So if the city was to take on the additional maintenance, but there was no offset of revenue, then there's really no way to offset except for dipping into the general fund to offset the impacts that are created from these weddings and parties and uses of the property. The ad hoc committee and staff researched various aspects of the operations, maintenance and vendor agreements, financial statements and budgets, revenue generation opportunities for the Camarillo Ranch Foundation, and outside of the venue rentals to offset programming costs, and for the city to offset maintenance costs. The city of Carlsbad's Leo Carrillo Ranch model was also considered. The City of Carlsbad is responsible for all maintenance and operations of the ranch outside the programming and its costs provided by the Friends of the Camarillo Ranch, who similarly fundraise through events, donations, memberships, and provide educational, historical, and cultural programming, and at times has provided the City of Carlsbad with donations for upgrades. The ad hoc committee looked at the maintenance operation requirements, the interior and exterior maintenance, preservation of the property, historical artifacts and other assets. Also looked at the space availability, the storage, and office space. As I mentioned, the financial statements and revenue opportunities were reviewed, the statements, vendor contracts, and the Leo Carrillo Ranch. The ad hoc committee's recommendation is one that focuses on the core of the primary activities of the foundation, which is to preserve the historic Camarillo Ranch for the enjoyment of the public in a manner that is more aligned to each organization's core mission. There are funding sources available for the Camarillo Ranch Foundation outside of the venue, rentals, meetings, and commissions. And as I described earlier, includes fundraising, donations, and memberships, as well as other opportunities such as grant funding. The city will need funding from the venue rentals, as it was intended to offset the cost of maintenance upgrades. As it was intended to offset the cost of maintenance, upgrades, and utilities, and other costs associated with the property, as it's described in the proposed lease agreement that Mr. Pierrick will now go over with you.
Does somebody have the clicker? Thank you. There we go. Oh, thank you, Carmen. As Carmen has indicated, I'm going to be reviewing a proposed lease agreement. I will mention in terms of what's in the agenda packet that the operating agreement itself is found at big pages 9 through 17, and then the lease agreement is found at big pages 18 and following. Okay, there we go. This is, what you're seeing now is a site plan of the ranch. It is marked as Exhibit A in your agenda packet, big page 27. I'm sure that most or all of you have already been to the ranch many times and familiar with the ranch house and the other structures that exist, the parking lot, the barn, and other features of the ranch. As Carmen also mentioned, there is currently an operating agreement that's been in effect between the foundation and the city. Under the operating agreement, there's the references to how the foundation was selected by the City Council to preserve and maintain the property and the structures as an historical site and transform it into a focal point of the community for educational enrichment and enjoyment, and to exhibit the diversity, history, and culture of the city. This comes right out of the operating agreement. In terms of the licensing of events, the operating agreement provides that the foundation is allowed to license the use of the property for events such as weddings and other private events, and that the foundation retains the deposit for the event. Typically, it's 50% of the fee for the use of the ranch for the event, and then the balance of the fee is due at least 90 days before. So in the PowerPoint, as well as in the draft lease agreement, you will see the word deposit, and that is intended to refer to the initial amount that is paid for the event, and then the balance of the fee. My understanding is that it is due 90 days before the event, but it could be paid prior to that or in installments. But whatever is due as of 90 days before the event would need to be paid. Now, the responsibilities under the operating agreement for the city and the foundation, you've heard from Carmen as to what those are. What I've done here is to take straight from the operating agreement what those responsibilities are, which are consistent with what Carmen had indicated, that the city's responsible for maintaining the exterior of the home, the barn, the accessory structures, and the parking areas, and that the foundation is responsible for interior refurbishing and maintenance of the home, barn, accessory structures, and to provide appropriate furnishings and to maintain the grounds and fence so as to permit the home's use as contemplated by and set forth in the agreement. And further, the foundation has been paying for the utilities as part of those obligations. All right, now I'm moving on from the operating agreement to the lease agreement. The lease agreement would be between the city and the foundation. The term of the lease is consistent with what the term of the current operating agreement is, and that would be through December 31 of 2025. You will see in the lease that it's contemplated that the approval of the lease would result in a termination of the operating agreement as of August 1, and then the lease agreement would start on August 1 of 2019. So that's the term of the lease. The termination of the lease could be terminated by mutual consent, a breach of the lease agreement, or upon 90 days written notice by one party to another. I should mention that those termination provisions that you're seeing here for the lease agreement are identical to the termination provisions that are in the operating agreement. So, under the lease, it is proposed in Section 3 that the ranch would be entitled to use the property for these various uses that are listed A through J: for the preservation of the house, to provide for the property to continue to be a focal point of the community, to sponsor community events and retain funds that might be raised by those community events. An example of a community event, which you heard from Carmen, was the so-called Throwback Thursdays. There's also Tales of the Ranch, there's Christmas at the Ranch, and other various what we would call community events, as opposed to rental events. Rental events would include weddings and other private rentals. Filming and photography is done at the ranch, and the foundation would continue to be permitted to use the ranch for filming and photography when individuals or companies want to do any filming or photography out there. It goes through the foundation. They would get a permit from the city, but that would be another source of funds available to the foundation for any funds that are received as a result of the filming and photography. In terms of the office space, we put into the lease agreement that office space for the foundation would be as agreed upon by the city and the foundation. I think I'm going to jump ahead, hopefully, to a floor plan. There we go. This is a floor plan of the offices. Don't know exactly if they're all being used as offices now. This was a floor plan we were provided. I think it generally gives an idea of what is available out there. There's a workshop, some offices, and storage, and other features, as you see. So I'm going to go back to where I left off. So I left off on office space. The matter of private rentals for weddings and such is going to be governed by Sections 5 and 6 of the lease agreement, which I'll get to in a few minutes.
It says 4 and 5.
What did I say?
5 and 6.
Okay, well, I just want to see if you're paying attention. Okay. You're correct, it's 4 and 5. The next use would be to maintain the ranch website, which they currently do. Then to access to the ranch house, they would have access to it unless there was a city licensed event. They could continue, as they have been, to raise funds through donations and membership. And then finally, to coordinate the use of the property with the city. That will be important because, as you will see when I get to the next sections, there would be, as proposed here, 2 entities that would be booking events at the ranch, the community events and tours and such that the foundation would be doing, and then the rental events. And so we'll get forward to, we've already seen that. So this is the proposed, this is Section 4. It's the use by the foundation for the property for rental events through October 31 of 2019. There's a number of provisions in the lease agreement, in the operating agreement that set forth the conditions under which those activities take place. Just to pick an example, if the events are of 600 or more expected participant, there's an event application that has to be approved. Outdoor events can go no later than midnight, and various other provisions that are currently in the operating agreement. And there's also some limitations, and those are on big page 11 of the operating agreement. It's also in the lease agreement in terms of the events being conducted in accordance with the policies, and if alcohol is to be served, that there would need to be a license issued by the ABC and the various other limitations. Those are all consistent with what's in the current operating agreement. So that's A and B. C is the revenue from the rental events. Under the lease agreement, it's proposed that the foundation would retain the deposits for the rental events for which a license is issued by the foundation through October 31 of 2019, regardless of the date of the rental event. So if there's a rental event that is scheduled in August, is when the license, so if it's licensed in August and the event's not going to take place until January or February of 2020, the foundation would have been the entity that would have booked that event, if you will, so they would retain the deposit under the current draft of the lease. The second point here under revenue from the rental events is that the foundation will receive the balance of the fee. Remember, I explained earlier the balance of the fee is whatever's left after the deposit, whatever else needs to be paid. So for the balance of the fee taking place for events prior to November 1, which was licensed by the foundation prior to November 1. And then the third piece here under the issue of revenue is that for rental events after November 1, 2019, that the city would be responsible for providing all services for those rental events, and the city would receive the balance of the fee and any commissions that are earned related to those events. Currently, there's a contract with Command Performance, and there's a commission that is earned as a result of those services that the foundation receives, and that would be a commission that would be payable to the city once the city is taking over those events. The foundation would have access to the bridal suite for those events which take place prior to November 1, and shall be responsible for cleaning of the bridal suite through that date. So that is Section 4. Here's Section 5. This is the use of the property by the city. Section A is the city may use the property in any lawful manner that does not conflict with the foundation use. I call this an omnibus section that basically says that the city can use it, as it says, for lawful purposes if it doesn't conflict. The second use by the city would be that commencing November 1 of 2019 is consistent with what was in Section 4, that only the city may license rental events, and that the city or a contractor retained by the city would provide the services with those events after November 1, that the city would retain the deposit and the balance of the fee for those rental events licensed by the city. Recall what I had said previously was that if the event had been licensed by the foundation through November 31, no matter when the event took place, they would keep that deposit. And that the city would be entitled to receive any commissions for those rental events. And then finally, the city would agree to coordinate its use of the property with the uses of the property by the foundation. This is a reciprocal obligation. We need to coordinate with the city would need to coordinate with the foundation with regard to the city uses and vice versa. On the issue of maintenance, from August 1 through, that's a typo, that should be October 31. That's what you get for a lawyer putting together a PowerPoint, but that date should be 31. So for the foundation would continue to be responsible for the maintenance under the operating agreement, and then what I did here was restate what those maintenance obligations are under the operating agreement, which I previously went through in my earlier comments, so I'm not going to repeat that again. And then the city would continue to have its same responsibilities as exist under the operating agreement, namely responsible for the maintenance of the exterior of the home, the barn, and the accessory structures. All right. So the next slide deals with Section 6 on maintenance beginning November 1, 2019, and this is broken down as between the foundation and the city. So, number one, the foundation would be responsible for the acquisition, maintenance, and replacement of the ranch house furnishings, wallpaper, and period finishes. 2, the preservation of all historical artifacts, pictures, documents, and accoutrements. 3, the cleaning of the interior of the house except for the bridal suite. Recall that we're talking here about November 1. Prior to November 1, the foundation would have access to the bridal suite and would be responsible for the cleaning. Number 4, the costs associated with the uses of the property by the foundation. Those are the uses that I mentioned in my earlier comments. So that's the foundation after November 1. The city after November 1 would have these responsibilities: the maintenance of the interior and exterior of all structures on the property except for the foundation responsibilities that were mentioned up here. 2 is the maintenance of all landscaping, grounds, and parking lots. 3, maintenance and cost of all utilities on the property, which are currently being paid for by the foundation. 4 is custodial services of all structures on the property except for the cleaning of the interior of the house. And finally, for the alarm service for the ranch. There are some additional provisions in the draft lease, which I'll go through now. Under Section 7 of the draft lease for capital improvements, the city's going to be responsible for all capital improvements on the property, and I guess I really meant it because I say it twice, on the property. Then we got Section 8 is our annual reports, the requirement for the foundation to provide an annual report. And here's a little bit of a difference than what's in the operating agreement. We took the language directly from the foundation bylaws as to what's to be included in that report. So that's what you see here in this text, that every October 1st, per the bylaws, they're to submit an annual report to the council to include pertinent information as to the activities, events, finances, and related matters of the foundation for the previous 12 months. The annual report shall also include all requests for city council assistance during the next fiscal year. And then in addition, that the city will contract at city expense for an annual audit of the foundation and the preparation of the tax returns. This provision here is, in fact, what currently exists. So that's a continuation of the status quo. Some other additional provisions in terms of entry on the property, the city manager can authorize that. This comes direct from the operating agreement, Section 10, also from the operating agreement, real property, in terms of the foundation having no ownership interest in the property or the improvements. Movable personal property, that all movable furnishings shall be and remain the property of the foundation. That's what the operating agreement provides for now. And then finally, and I made this comment earlier in my presentation, that the operating agreement is terminated as of August 1 of 2019, and that would be when the lease agreement would become effective. So the suggested actions tonight, there's 3. The first one is to authorize the city manager to execute the proposed lease agreement after the lease agreement has been executed by the foundation. 2, to authorize the city manager to make minor changes as necessary and in consultation with the Camarillo Ranch Operating Agreement Ad Hoc Committee to accomplish the execution of a lease agreement with the foundation effective August 1 of 2019. And then thirdly, to direct the city manager to take steps necessary to implement the transition of operational and maintenance responsibilities between the city and the foundation. So I would also like to add that based upon the lease agreement as you see it, that the expectation is that the revenue that the city would receive, as I explained in my earlier comments and as referenced by Carmen in her comments, that the revenue that the city would receive from the rental events would be used by the city to maintain we're going to have an increased maintenance responsibility under the lease agreement. So that revenue that the city would receive would be used, to pay for that maintenance obligation. In addition to that, I want to mention that there's nothing in the lease agreement that would in any way impact the scheduled events. And as a matter of fact, there's provisions in there that says that any events that are scheduled at the ranch will continue to proceed as scheduled, and any events that are to be scheduled in the future also will take place, that the ranch is going to remain open for business as we contemplated under this lease agreement, and that there would not be any interruption in the ranch availability for use by anyone that wishes to book a private event out there. So that completes my presentation, and I am available to respond to questions.
Any questions, Mrs. Braven?
I have a question, but it's for Mrs. Nichols. Could you clarify a little bit more, or explain a little bit more how it works with the City of Carlsbad and the Leo Carrillo property as to who, which organization there, which entity there retains does the renting out for events such as weddings, and who retains the deposit and the balance, as Mr. Pierrick is calling it, for those events?
Yes, Councilmember Craven, the City of Carlsbad is responsible for the operation, the venue rentals through an agreement with a third party. In the agreement, there is a set fee that the third party vendor will pay the City of Carlsbad, as well as a flat amount, an annual flat amount, plus a fee for the type of event and when it takes place. So the City of Carlsbad is really over that venue rental operation. So they receive the revenue from that. Then that is used to offset the maintenance to the property. So it's and use of other general funds, but the revenue that they're receiving, that the City of Carlsbad receives from this agreement, venue rental agreement, offsets those operational costs. The City of Carlsbad also has staff that maintain the ranch and that are there at the ranch. The Friends of the Carrillo Ranch Foundation then are a separate entity, a nonprofit 501c3 that through their revenue generation of fundraising through community events, memberships, donations, and such. They also have a bookstore or a gift shop of sorts. That revenue then is used to offset the programming, the educational and cultural programming that they provide. The City of Carlsbad then allows them the use of a structure and other structures depending on where they have their exhibits, but the use of a structure for them to run their operations. But they're two different operations. The Friends of the Carrillo Ranch also raise funds and at times have given back to the city for the upgrade of a structure for the city. So they're two very different entities. The revenue generation of the venue portion of that goes directly to the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
Yeah, one, Mr. Mayor. This might be for Brian. Is there, under this new model, is there anything that would preclude the Camarillo Ranch Foundation from either approaching the city for grants and or some sort of community event funding and or approaching the Camarillo Tourism and Marketing District to the best of your knowledge?
Well, there's nothing that would prevent them from approaching the city, and I'm not sure about the other opportunities that they would have, but I'm the city attorney, so I can say that they could approach the city.
Thank you.
Any other questions? No. I have one other question. As far as the docents there. Does this agreement deal with that at all?
I think we made reference to, in Section 3B, and let me tell you where that is in your packet. Big page 19, Section 3B like boy. It talks about the foundation will provide for the property to continue to be a focal point, that paragraph. The last sentence in that paragraph reads that these services will include coordination of docents and other volunteers.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, are there any other questions? No. I have several cards, so the first is Karen Prow. Karen, let me make sure that I've got this. I have the microphone. Is she here? Yes, she is. Oh, and if you could limit your comments to 3 minutes, Karen, we have several cards. I'd appreciate
I
it.
understand. And I was asked to speak for Susanna Reeder, and I have a letter from her. Should I read it after mine, or should I sit down and come back up later?
You could. How about reading it after your opening comments here, if you would?
My name is Karen Prow, and I'm a retired school administrator for Pleasant Valley School District and have been a member of the CRF for more than 15 years. I have loved being a volunteer as a member of this community in a position that helps to preserve the heritage and legacy of Adolfo Camarillo. I felt so strongly about this that as a new board member, I went through docent training to be better informed about Adolfo and what he meant to this community, county, and indeed the state of California. In reading the information in your proposed lease agreement, the brevity in which Mr. Kildee had to ask about of how the heritage and legacy has moved forward and indeed expanded is a major concern. It appears that Adolfo's heritage and legacy is a minor footnote in this lease agreement with the city. The idea that we will be able to raise money to maintain the inside of the house as well as to support our programs or add new ones defies reality. Except for Charlotte, I really am not sure about how much the rest of the City Council understands the number of hours that board members, docents, and others volunteer at the ranch. We do it because we love the ranch and value its importance to the city of Camarillo, not because we are paid. We do it because we are fortunate that the home of Mr. Camarillo has been restored. We do it because we want this property preserved for future generations. While you give lip service to the importance of the ranch and Mr. Camarillo, who's on the city logo, your lack of working collaboratively with the board has not only been a disservice to the people of Camarillo, but short-sighted. We do not even have control over who should be on our board, and it's not in this new lease agreement either. Who better to know the needs of the board than the members of the CRF? Who knew? I just found out that there is a Camarillo Ranch Committee on the City Council. Why not have a member of the executive committee of the CRF meet with this committee periodically? It would seem that it would certainly help communications. To be clear, if the city determines to take over control of the wedding rental venue and take probably 90% of our income, then it needs to take full responsibility of the maintenance and the long-term preservation of the entire property and all its buildings inside and out. And they also need to develop a budget item to support all the programs that they say they want us to continue, including the docents, recruitment and training, Santa nights, school tours, Kids' Day at the Ranch, Throwback Thursday, and other activities meant to further Adolfo's legacy. I understand as elected officials you are in a different position than the CRF is as volunteers. However, you have a unique historic property and dedicated civic-minded volunteers who have helped keep history alive in this community. I hope you understand your responsibility in maintaining not only the property, but the memory of Adolfo Camarillo and all he stood for. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to proceed with your?
Okay.
We do have a copy of it up here as well.
All right. Susanna Reeder is a founding member of the CRF. She's been on the board for 20 years. She's unable to be here because her son is undergoing surgery down at UCLA. My name is Susanna Reeder, and I am a Camarillo resident. I'm on the board of directors of the Camarillo Ranch Foundation, and along with Jerry Olson, have been there since more than 20 years. I'm also Adolfo Camarillo's great-granddaughter. I was thrilled to be asked to be on the board. We quickly figured out what an opportunity we had to restore and preserve the legacy of Adolfo Camarillo for the entire community. Between our board of directors, our incredible docents, our dedicated staff, we have, as our mission statement says, created a focal point for the entire community. From our first Merienda celebration, thank you for our volunteers, our first Adolfo Camarillo birthday celebration, our first docent-led tour, our first school tour, our first holiday gala, our first Santa night, our first car show, our first Throwback Thursday, we have found was to include the community and to showcase the ranch as the jewel in the crown of Camarillo, and to educate and teach the community about Adolfo Camarillo and what he means to this city that bears his name. With the exception of a small staff, we are all volunteers. We did what we did because we love the ranch and want it to thrive. We started fundraising and we built a large event rental business to offset costs associated with maintaining this lovely property. We have grown it to where it is today. We have spent thousands and thousands of hours working at the ranch, our families right alongside. My husband would help at the events, and my kids grew up volunteering with me in the gift shop on Sundays. Again, we did this for no gain other than wanting the ranch to thrive. I know my great-grandfather would be very proud of what we have accomplished. We had a couple of poor years financially, and what did we do? We turned to you, City of Camarillo, who owns this precious and historic property, and asked for some help. Not only did you say no, you are trying to take parts of it away from us. After all the years and all we have done, I am truly offended. It is not too late for you to do the right thing and continue the legacy. I sincerely hope you will. Thank you.
Thank you. Next, Martin Daly.
My name is Martin Daly. I am a current board member of the Camarillo Ranch Foundation, but tonight my comments are as a 75-year resident of the city of Camarillo. I have written a letter which I will deliver to the city clerk, which expresses my opinions on this subject in much more detail. The Camarillo Ranch is, as we all know, a historical landmark and home of our founding father, Adolfo Camarillo. It is a city-owned property, a historic property, and in my opinion, it should be the primary responsibility of the city to take care of this property. I am personally tired of being told by the city that there is no money available or it is not in the budget, when in fact, your 2018-19 adopted budgets show $86,971 is available, and your 2019-20 budget shows $87,876. To my knowledge, the foundation has not seen 1 cent of these budgeted monies, not in the 5 years that I have served on the board. The proposed new lease as presented to the foundation last Thursday and before you tonight is an insult to every former and current docent, master gardener, board member, and anyone who's ever volunteered at the ranch. City staff's own research of 6 similar properties show that the City of Camarillo is the only governmental agency owning similar properties that does not provide all or major portion of funding necessary to maintain those properties. I suggest you ask yourselves this evening why it doesn't support its own property and why you have before you a lease that puts the entire revenue stream in the hands of the city and away from the foundation. As a caveat to my comments, listening to what was said about the city of Carlsbad, it was failed to disclose to you that the city of Carlsbad also told us when we visited there that they have a $2.5 million capital improvement budget set aside for their facility.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have David Schlangen. David's here.
Good evening, Mayor Kildee, council members, city staff, and fellow Camarilloans. My name is David Schlangen, and I've lived in Camarillo for 44 years. As well as serving on other organizations to benefit the city, I have had the honor of being on the Camarillo Ranch Foundation Board of Directors for the past 4 years and have enjoyed volunteering my time, energy, and passion to assist the Camarillo Ranch House. Like me, I know all of you on the dais, in this room, and watching on TV love this city and want what is best for it, including the Camarillo Ranch House. While on the Board of Directors, I've worked with other board members, docents, and ranch staff that feel the same way, if not more. 67 years ago, Adolfo Camarillo built the ranch house for his wife, and it has been a gem of the community ever since. I'm here this evening asking you to direct city staff to continue negotiations with us so we can work together in keeping the Camarillo Ranch House a gem and a beacon for the community to come together, just as Adolfo Camarillo made the ranch house when he was alive and would want it to always be. Thank you.
Thank you. Emily Petrie.
Mayor Kildee and City Council members, my name is Emily Petrie, and I am a dedicated staff member of the Camarillo Ranch Foundation. My job is to keep the momentum of the Foundation's mission in the execution of community events, volunteer operations, house and school tour scheduling, museum exhibit curation, marketing, donor and sponsor relations, and all other daily administrative work. My duties exclude venue rental support, although I do field calls and greet guests when needed. The past year and some months that I've been on the staff has been a time of growing and shrinking pains. We gained staff, and ultimately we lost staff, and the workload has been heavy ever since. We are small and mighty and do the work with a family mentality and smile on our face. I find my work to be meaningful and challenging. I am passionate about this place and the community it serves, the family it bonds together, and the legacy it holds. The good in all this change with its ebbs and flows is that I've gotten to know the heart of the organization at this wonderful ranch, the docents. These women and few good men share the stories of the Camarillo family with passion, dedication, and excellence. They are the lifeblood of the beautifully running school tour program, which offers free field study opportunities for elementary school students across Ventura County and even transportation grants for Title I schools who cannot afford a bus to come and learn about ranch life in the early 1900s. This ranch and the curriculum that the activities and lessons taught here supports is essential to children learning about where they are growing up and how they got where they are today. The modern world is not an easy place for the youth and the retired community. The ranch is a place for both of these communities as well as other groups of people. The majority of our docents and volunteers are retired. They have found community here and made lasting friendships. They volunteer day in and day out to support the foundation in its mission to educate. They care about the house and take care of it like their own home. They are the first group of people to get fired up and speak out should the staff or board make decisions that do not sit well with them. Some of them knew the Camarillo family and know the importance of sharing their stories with the community. They were all here well before me and before most of our board. I do not speak for them, although I have gotten to know them and deeply care about the outcome of the operating negotiations between the city and the foundation board. The ranch is a welcoming place to learn, grow, and explore the possibilities of life. Until I started working at the ranch, I never had been allowed to wear so many hats and serve such a diverse group of people. I see the community experience joy at our events. I see children get excited about learning through experiential activities that would be boring to read in a textbook. I see volunteers so bonded as if they were family, a board that tries continually to make this foundation a success among many obstacles and naysayers, and lastly, a staff that through all this turmoil has truly shone so bright and has worked like a well-oiled micro machine to get the job done and do it with grace, respect, and positivity. I strongly believe that greed has no place in the future of the Camarillo Ranch. The story at the ranch starts with love and should continue to be run with love. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Anna Battelle.
Good evening. My name is Anna Blattell, and I think a couple of you probably know me from Pleasant Valley School District. I worked there for almost 30 years and continued on and volunteered to work at the Camarillo Ranch. I was one of the beginners at the Camarillo Ranch. I have been there 20 years. In 20 years, I have seen so many changes that have happened. We have worked very, very hard with different boards, different personalities, and our group of docents are still standing. We are a group that has not changed so much as to where we quit somewhere along the line. In 20 years, we have had thousands of kids that have come to the ranch. My heart is with those kids, and you have to realize, perhaps none of you have ever been to one of our tours. I know in the past we were a little bit more cohesive between city perhaps and our board. I would like to perhaps for you to think that perhaps there would be more talks to where we could remain continuing in the path that we have been on. I do not think that our group is broken. I do not think our board is broken. I think there should be some more talks involved to where things that went wrong perhaps could be remedied, and perhaps we could come up with some solutions. I just noticed in the proposals that there's a lot of talk about money, and there were maybe 2 lines reserved for docents. Believe me, we play a huge part in the city, and I do not for 1 minute think that if the community would know that the city wouldn't be helping us to preserve that ranch in order for us to do our job. We need perhaps a little help from the city when it comes to the repairs, when it comes to things that happen there, our books that have to be printed. There is a little bit of money that needs to be coming from somewhere else besides doing donations on people that are already donating. In addition to that, I do notice there's a lot of talk about the maintenance. Everything that we have done in that house, believe me, from the gardeners to the people that donate extra time that do maintenance in that house, all of that is done from the heart, and they are not paid oftentimes. So I do not see where the city is beginning to say that they're going to provide more maintenance, overall maintenance, when you do not see a dirty house and the gardens are beautiful. So I would like for you to think about that before you go hiring gardeners and you go hiring maintenance people. Thank you.
Thank you. Jerry Olson?
Good evening. I'm Jerry Olson, and I've been a resident of Camarillo for 59 years. I live at 861 Durkin Street in Camarillo. I've been a member of the Camarillo Ranch Foundation Board for 20 years. I, along with Susanna Reeder, are 2 of the remaining members of the original Ranch Board of 1999. Legacy, tradition, history, heritage, but especially legacy. The Camarillo Ranch is a symbol of all of these. It is a symbol of Adolfo Camarillo, the founder of Camarillo, of his wife Isabella, and the Camarillo family. The Camarillo house is now 127 years old. 127 years. It is badly need a repair. It needs restitution. It needs preservation. The mule barn, which is now called the Red Barn, is 114 years old. It also needs repairs and a fresh coat of paint. We board members are volunteers. We contribute our time willingly for its operation. I contribute an average of 10 hours a week for the ranch. Take that for 20 years, that's 10,040 hours. A lot of time. In addition to my wife and I donate several $1,000s each year to the Camarillo Ranch. As board members, we care about the ranch. We care about the Camarillo house. We care about the barn. We care about their future. 100 years from now, 2119, I hope there still will be a Camarillo Ranch where third graders can come and visit, where they can rope a calf, make butter, run, jump, and play. I hope it will be treasured, honored, visited, and used. But we need your help to make this legacy come alive, to make this future happen. It still has much work to do, but we can do this together, the City Council and the Camarillo Ranch Foundation Board, in a spirit of cooperation and appreciation of this legacy. We can preserve this legacy together. Thank you. And I have copies for the City Council and for the staff.
Thank you. Next is Matt Cohagen.
Good evening, Council. My name is Matt Cohagen. I'm the newest board member, about 9 months now, and about a 40-year resident of Camarillo, and I'm speaking as a private citizen. I value the ranch as a valuable Camarillo historic landmark, and I encourage the city to consider all and any reasonable options to work collaboratively with the CRF to preserve and maintain the ranch. Ultimately, it is the city's property, responsibility to fund the property and the ranch, and I'd like to encourage the city to consider all reasonable funding options. I do realize, ideally, it's best for it to be a self-sustaining adventure, but if we need to get money from the general fund or other funding options, I think I'd like for the city to consider that option to keep this historic landmark open for all future generations. I thank the council for listening to me. I'd like to especially thank all the board members for all their hard work and all their many hours, and the docents for their volunteer time, and especially in this hard time, the staff of the ranch that are doing a fantastic job. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Jill Hardy.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Jill Blampier Hardy, and I want to thank you for my time here tonight. My wish for the city to partner with the Ranch Foundation Board is to partner with them in an equitable manner to keep it operational with both sides contributing ideas and keeping reasonable options open, to continue to work with the board, finding a way to keep the ranch house available to our community. The historical significance of the ranch house is immense within our culture here in Camarillo. As part of his education of our city, my grandson did a tour of the house this last year. He talked about what he learned about Camarillo because of his tour. And he talked, and he talked, and he talked, and he drove me nuts, as did his father 20 years ago. I myself have officiated 2 weddings there, and the ambiance of the house itself was a very big part of their day. I feel it's important that this historic landmark remain available to the citizens of our county now and in the future. I would like to thank the board for their 20 years of unpaid volunteer service in preserving the Camarillo Ranch House as one of our city's treasures. Without their dedication, it would not be there for all of us to enjoy. The integrity of the ranch house as we know it is because of them. Thank you for allowing me to have this time tonight.
Thank you. Next is Charles Devlin. Charles, yeah, there he is.
Good evening, Mayor, council members, staff. My name is Charles Devlin, President of the Camarillo Ranch Foundation. I have with me tonight, with great reluctance, that I need to present to City Clerk our termination of the agreement with the city. It will be in effect in 90 days. As I said, I do this with great reluctance, as I had hoped that our dealings with the ad hoc committee would have a different result. But this lease agreement proposal that you see shows that we have not been successful. So I want to thank the board. I would like to thank my board, but I'd also like to thank the City Council for appointing me to this position. Other than the last few months, it's been with great pleasure that I've led this organization, and especially been able to interact with the incredible board members, staff, and our volunteers who work very hard, and it's all about because they care about the ranch. So I also have, I think, at your place, my comments on the agreement, and my hope that we will be able to continue the negotiations during this 90-day period. And I'd be happy to answer any questions about our position on the agreement or the termination at this time.
Thank you. Any questions at this time? Do you have any questions? Mr. Moshe?
Got a few. Give me 1 second here. Charles, first I want to thank you and your service, and the board service and the volunteers and the staff, and I think I don't have anything negative to say about any of you personally, not one bit. I read your letter that you had sent, and I saw the reference to the termination agreement, or the termination notice. I'm having some trouble, and I have some questions, and I want you to help me through this. In the original letter that you did send to the city initiating the whole ad hoc process, the negotiation between the city and the CRF, you did mention that self-sufficiency may no longer be attainable, especially in light of changes in the event business and the ever-increasing costs of maintaining historic properties. As staff had mentioned in their staff report, you had made mention of the Leo Carrillo Ranch model, and we researched a lot of that very thoroughly. In the lease agreement that's proposed, and that we had sat down, we discussed earlier last week, what proposed in the lease agreement doesn't jive with some of your concerns outlaid in initiating this process. As I saw it, you had concerns about the ranch, the self-sustaining manner of maintaining the ranch. We're going to take all that responsibility and burden the cost of that. We're going to take the utilities and we'll burden the cost of that. We will, in light of the fact that the market is regularly changing and the market may be that there is some volatility, and it kind of comes ebbs and flows with economic cycles when it comes as it pertains to the rental business. We are going to take that as well and hopefully use that to offset all the costs of the other things of maintaining the property and paying the utilities and the like. In that, what further concerns do you have in regards to the agreement? What specifically does the lease agreement as proposed not quite cover, or what would you like to see us to more thoroughly discuss?
Well, in the agreement, the city still requires a foundation to maintain the interior of the house. That's unacceptable. This is your property, Sean. It belongs to the city and its citizens. You need to take care of it. And as pointed out earlier, and as you know, in almost every occasion that we've found, the city or the entity that owns that property provides for that upkeep of that property entirely. At Leo Carrillo, city of Carlsbad takes care of that entire property. Now, what Carmen failed to mention is, in addition to take care of the landscaping, outsourcing the events. It does not cover all the cost. In fact, the city manager that we met with said there's probably an additional $500,000 that the city contributes to that property for its preservation and upkeep. $500,000. Are you ready for that?
Well, I don't think that the taxpayers are going to burn an extra $100,000, but
$500,000,
or
$500,000.
$500,000
This 25 acres.
versus
It's a 25-acre property, and ours isn't.
as it pertains.
I was at that property. I know what goes on down there. I interviewed the manager responsible for that and the caterer that they've outsourced it to.
So Charles, so in regards, you made two comments. I want to ask follow-up questions as it pertains to those. So your understanding, this agreement, we would take care of the plumbing and the electrical, the bones of that house. If the roof leaks, we will patch the roof, fix the roof.
As you should.
As we should. That's perfectly fine. That is very similar to a landlord and a tenant, right? If I were renting an apartment to you, I would suspect that I would be responsible for making sure that property is adequate. As a tenant, you're going to come in and you can paint the walls, you're going to vacuum the floor, you're going to put your furniture about and whatnot, and you're going to conduct your business and whatever it is you want inside that apartment or home or whatever you want to use, whatever analogy you want. But I don't see the relationship, or I don't see that language differing much from a normal lease agreement in that we'll make sure this thing is standing, we'll make sure it's adequate, we'll make sure the water's running, the electrical is on, that neither of those pose any kind of risk to the house and or the functions of the CRF as they conduct their business inside that house. But that you guys do currently maintain and own the period pieces. The furniture in that house is largely donated, and a lot of board members have procured that on behalf of the CRF. I would suspect that seeing that you're using it day in and day out, I hope that you'd vacuum the floors and occasionally go in and polish some of the wood and the molding or whatnot. I don't think it really constitutes a significant financial burden is what we're proposing. That most of the financial burden in terms of the preservation and the upkeep and the maintenance of the property is going to be burdened by the city in this lease agreement.
Correct, as you should be. The issue primarily is the fact that you're taking all of our revenue, I think at least 90% of our revenue, which leaves us very little, if nothing, to put on events, and you potentially may be taking our staff. So in effect, we'll have nothing if we agree to this lease agreement. And I think more importantly for me personally, this is the city's property. You should be maintaining it.
That's largely what we're proposing.
You're going to do that money that we have raised and the wedding business that we built.
Right. Which is what back in 1998. I don't mean to get. I don't want to argue with you or anything here. I mean, back in 1998, and I have a copy of the minutes, and when the CRF was originally created. And it said the site could also be rented for business meetings and conferences. The resulting revenues, along with those from all rentals, would be used for maintenance and upgrading the property. And we're keeping in line with the original intention that this rental business would be used to offset the cost and the maintenance and the upkeep of that property, so that, like many of these historical properties in a lot of these different municipalities, they don't become what many have effectively termed a money pit for taxpayers. That we're not dumping $200,000, $300,000, $400,000, $500,000 in trying to maintain them. Here we actually have a sustainable model. We've figured out a sustainable way of maintaining these properties without overly burdening the Camarillo taxpayer. I think that's financially prudent. To your point about money, I won't argue that this does constitute a shift for the CRF. And there's some thinking that has to be done on your feet, and there's going to have to be some reorganization as to how you fundraise and the efforts put into primarily event fundraising and donations and memberships. I do know that as is proposed in your guys' budget for this next coming up, or this upcoming fiscal year, you propose that you guys are going to receive or earn $120,000 through donations and event revenue. You have approximately probably a little less than $200,000 in liquid assets in the bank. And then, as per the lease agreement, we're going to, in that the Camarillo Ranch Foundation will be able to keep deposits, all deposits made up to, for events booked on, before, or after, up to November 1st. There's probably approximately about $100,000 in kind of what I'll term as passive income that you guys will be able to take, but you guys don't necessarily, you guys will book it as revenue, but you guys don't necessarily need to service down the road when it's actually recognized as revenue and the event occurs. So I would think that the assets that you guys have, between the assets you have, the $100,000 in passive revenue, which will stretch out over the course of about a year to a year and a half, and the $120,000 that's already coming in via revenue through donations and event revenue, I would hope that that would buy you guys what I would assume would be somewhere between a year to 2 years to invest more time in when it comes to donations, trying to develop more sustainable events, and the like, and finding alternative revenue sources to maintain the education, celebration, and events, all that stuff. Tell me where I'm off base. Tell me where you have concerns within that.
Well, let me go back to your statement about 1998. Do you think the world is a little different today in 2019 than it was in 1998?
Certainly is.
Do you think that house is a little older in 2019 than it was in 1998?
Certainly
Do you
is.
think the cost of maintaining that house has increased since 1998?
And it certainly has.
So that's my answer. Let me ask you a question. I think you asked Brian about, is there any clause within this lease agreement for the foundation to come to the city and ask for assistance or financial assistance or something to that effect?
Mm-hmm.
So let me tell you, or let me ask you, what happened when the foundation approached the city, I did it in writing, and said we had incurred extraordinary accounting costs as a result of the changes that were required by the city as a result of the audit. $19,000, which we can document, and I asked for that. And what was the city's answer?
In a nutshell?
Yeah.
In a nutshell, that we felt that responsibility was yours.
The nutshell was no. Not only no, but hell no.
I wouldn't put it like that, but
Well, I will.
that's
I'll
fine.
help you. I'm not an elected official.
Sir, sure. I was not.
By the way, Sean, I don't think this is a place to negotiate this agreement. If you folks are interested in further negotiation, we're open to that. The clock's running.
That's fine. I'm just trying to solicit. I'm looking for more information from you as to your position, your feelings in regards to the lease agreement.
I think that should take place at the negotiating table. We have an Hoc Committee, and that's what it's designed to do. And I think we, in effect, are wasting these people's time in this kind of detailed discussion. I'm available. My team's available. Call us if you want us.
Can I have one last question?
You bet.
During the ad hoc committee meeting, we were talking about maintenance and the upkeep of the property and the costs there too. You had mentioned, you made a statement to the effect of, we haven't properly upkept the property. We've definitely cut corners and we haven't invested the money necessary into properly maintaining that property.
That's correct. We haven't because we haven't had the money.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Other question?
Any other questions? Yeah, Ms. Santangelo.
Well, I want to thank everybody here tonight as well. I don't want anybody to think that we're not taking this very seriously and that we don't fully appreciate all of the time and hours and effort that you have spent. This is a very important part of Camarillo, and so I appreciate all of your efforts. I appreciate all of you being here tonight. I'm not on the ad hoc committee, and so in order for me to be able to hear some of these things firsthand, a lot of Mr. Molche's questions were very useful to me, because I don't understand completely where you're coming from, and I want to go back to your letter. The need to pursue events in order to, quote unquote, preserve them and maintain the property is distracting us from making it a focal point of the community for educational enrichment and enjoyment and to exhibit the diversity, history, and culture of the city. When I read that, to me that meant that the private venue business at the ranch was, as you said, distracting it from the main purpose of the ranch. And so when I entered this and tried to figure out where we're going to go, I very much thought that perhaps the venue rental was not, that's an intense market. And perhaps, and that being said, perhaps that's not fair to put on a group of volunteers whose true purpose is to maintain the historical aspect of the ranch. And so I really thought that we were coming at this as a way to help the ranch foundation, not to take something away, but to make it easier for you to fulfill your purpose. I have not, I've seen the word greed here a couple times, and whatever. We're not looking to make money off of wedding venues. In fact, I think we're actually taking on a volatile market. We may actually lose money in doing so, because we have also talked about taking over a lot of this maintenance. So my question for you is, if you had your ideal, what is your want? What do you want from the city?
First and foremost, the board would like the city to maintain the property in its entirety.
So let me drill down on that. I don't mean to interrupt you, but I want to drill down on the interior. So you want them to furnish it, to replace period pieces? Because that's the difference we're talking about. As Mr. Mulchay said, we're talking about maintaining it as a landlord would.
Correct. And I think in terms of those kinds of detail, I mean, in terms of who cleans it, who polishes it, who does those kinds of things, I think that's a matter of negotiation. But when something fails, for instance, and let me give you an example, we've been told that our hardwood floor has been sanded as much as it now can be sanded. So the next stop is replacing the hardwood in that house, which will be a pretty expensive endeavor. So if I were a landlord, and I don't like to talk in those terms because I don't feel like a tenant, but if I were a tenant and the hardwood floor of my home was at a point that it needed to be replaced because it had been sanded as much as it could, I would look to the landlord to replace that. But that's a matter of, I think, some negotiation that the foundation is more than willing to enter into. So first and foremost, maintaining the property as it should be maintained, and to develop a plan for the future that will address the future needs of that property. And I mentioned that we both have reserve studies conducted by the same organization, and that would be a good beginning point. So the city could look out ahead and appropriately budget, and the board would like to be part of that process. So that's first and foremost. But the other, I think, important issue, and I want to come back to this outsourcing of the commercial or the wedding events process. And let me tell you, I built my businesses on outsourcing to government agencies, that they felt like they could not perform the kind of work that my companies can do, so they outsource it to me. So I'm a believer in outsourcing, don't get me wrong. But I want to make sure that the work we've done with the team that we've built continues. And the board is very concerned and protective about these hardworking employees who've really done an extraordinary job of turning this foundation financially around. And I'll be responsible for the person who set that bar and said, we are going to perform, we're going to change the financials, and we're going to do it by June 30. And we've done it, and we will do it. And I'm proud of that, but it's not me personally. I didn't personally do it. It's these people that did. So going back to that outsourcing, and I think there was a quote that really wasn't any alternatives out there that was looked at, and I appreciate that you may not have been involved in the conversation and the negotiations. But we proposed, the foundation proposed, what I called a gain share, but really was a profit share. So that at some point, and we just arbitrarily set that point at $80,000, the first $80,000 that we made would go to the ranch. Well, I'm sorry, would go to the city. And it would tier up. So if you looked at that, you would earn the first $80,000 of that revenue business if you kept it with us. And then there's another tier. But if you combine that first 80 with the 86 or 7, Marty, I can't remember what it was, for 19, that you have in your budget, that would give you an excess of $160,000 to maintain that property. So there is an alternative to what's being discussed, a profit share alternative that we proposed and was rejected. And we get to keep this staff in place. And you don't have to enter into that risky wedding event business. We'll take that risk.
But with all due respect, you taking the risk, if the foundation can't maintain it financially, that ultimately falls on the city, does it not?
It does, but we have some reserves in place.
That's all.
Anybody else have any questions? No. Charles, I just have one, and I want to get back to a little bit of the maintenance, because I think we've got some questions here about the inside maintenance of it. And you had mentioned that at some point the floor is going to be replaced. Now,
yes, sir, soon.
My thinking is that that would be a capital improvement, and the owner of the facility would pay for that, somewhat akin to a lease that you have. Now, anything else in the if you look at your particular situation here with the Camarillo house, like the cleaning and any of the light maintenance and whatnot, that would be the foundation would be able to pay for that. Now, anything, let's say if there's a refrigerator there, or if there's a plumbing leak or anything like that, then the city would take care of that. So my question is that you talk about a little bit the maintenance of the inside of that building. Maybe you could educate me a little bit more about what that would constitute, other than just like a capital improvement or some heavy-duty repair and replace.
Well, I think the proposed lease agreement is, for the most part, silent on that. It talks about the wallpaper, for instance. It's like, well, why should we be responsible for replacing the wallpaper? But for the most part, Kevin, I think those are issues that we can negotiate. Mm-hmm. The large concerns, let me give you an example of those legacy trees. We don't have any expertise in terms of maintaining those trees. I came into the ranch as a master gardener, and I can tell you, when it comes to trees, I know enough to be dangerous. We need an arborist to be able to look at those trees on a regular basis and tell us if something's going wrong, and then do some preventative maintenance rather than have a limb fall off on one of our guests. So we don't have an arborist. We can't afford an arborist. The city has contracts with arborists. I think you even have one on staff. But that's an example of something that we currently are responsible for. We have considerable exposure, I think you do too, but we don't have the ability to take care of those trees. We want the city to do that.
Okay, thank you.
But that's exterior. He asked you about interior things, other than the floor, which you told us about.
Charlotte, we can negotiate those issues.
Well, these people have not been on the ad hoc committee and cannot be by law, so they're wanting more information.
Well, I don't know. I can't speak for my board in that regard, other than to say I believe that's an issue that we can negotiate, and then, when appropriate, if appropriate, add that to the lease agreement. Who's responsible for what?
And in the lease agreement, it already says that the city would take care of everything on the exterior, including the landscaping, which is the old trees and everything else that's there.
As you should.
Well, I'm just saying it already says that.
And I appreciate that. I have no argument with that.
Okay.
And-
Sounded like you did.
In terms of the interior of the house, that's a minor issue that I'm sure we could work out quickly. Who does what in that house?
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, as a follow-up
Mr.
question
Shea?
in regards, Charles, because, and I have a lot to swallow because you just served us with a 90-day termination notice. What would you, assuming that we can't find common ground and we can't come to agreement, what would happen to the CRF? It's my understanding, and I'm going, and anyone can correct me if I'm wrong, or city attorney or you, Charles, or anyone else, but if we in fact go through at the end of the 90 days and we terminate the operating agreement, the CRF is a nonprofit without a ranch, right?
We intend to seek legal counsel to help us with that issue.
Okay. My greatest concern and what I want to, and I don't know if if this termination was voted on by the board or whatever, but if you become a CRF without a ranch, then, and I know this has been a concern, but there are in excess of $200,000 in deposits or liabilities. Most of that constitutes venue deposits. If you don't have a venue, then what becomes of those deposits? I presume that they would either need to be refundable or that would need to be transferred. If so, then the CRF is upside down to the tune of about $50,000. And there's going to be a hole there. Not to mention, I know there's some other things too, contract with the caterer, and also in your endowment you have certain restricted funds that can't be used for, say, reimbursing deposits or the like. So I don't know where that puts you guys financially if you're not in a position to service the events that you have essentially agreed to. And so I just have a general concern about that. I want to air that concern, so I want to make sure that everyone doesn't jump over a cliff, because there may be extenuating circumstances or situations that might arise out of that, let alone legal ones. And I want to make sure we can avoid those. I know that the CRF, the board, retains D&O insurance, which is directors and officers insurance. I don't know to what extent that kind of insurance covers what situations. And I would absolutely recommend you look into that as well, though, and making sure.
To seek legal counsel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That's all the blue cards I have. Would anybody else like to come up here and address the council on this particular issue? Okay. So that gets us down to, are there any other comments that staff would like to make on any of these discussions that we've had now? Okay, if we don't.
I have a question
we
of
have
staff.
a question. Yes.
Yes, several, or at least two references were made to $87,000 in the city budget for the ranch. And I know in last year's budget there was more than that. It depends on where you look, because there was also a capital improvement project of a parking lot that was in there, and the parking lot money has been spent on the parking lot. But could either the city manager or the director of finance explain what the other $87,000 is for? There seemed to be a feeling that that was money that we had dedicated to be donated to the ranch. So I just wondered, while people are still here, if you could explain what the $87,000 is for that has been referenced.
I believe the funds that are referenced are for the Camarillo Ranch Facility Fund. We have a facility fund, and we do allocate staff time for some oversight of the ranch. The audit fees, we budget there as well. There are some other miscellaneous costs as well. I believe that that's the number that they were referencing. In addition, there is some depreciation expense, obviously not a cash outflow, so I believe the figure is about $80,000.
Okay, but a lot of that is for city staff that is allocated to
the ranch oversight.
The ranch oversight. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, I have one question.
Yeah.
And this is aimed at our city attorney. There was a comment made about the fact that the lease agreement as proposed doesn't involve how, it doesn't encompass how board members for the CRF are selected. It's my personal thought that you wouldn't find that normally in a lease agreement, and that would probably more likely be in the chartering papers for the nonprofit.
The answer is yes. I should mention that in your packet, there is a transition plan that appears on big page 29. And if you go to, it starts on big page 29, and if you go to, well, no, since I've already jumped into it, this transition plan is basically an outline of the lease agreement in terms of what occurs when, as was contemplated by the gender report, that from June and July of 2019 that the city and the foundation would enter into a lease agreement. Then from August 1 of 2019 to October 31 of 2019, there was the responsibilities of the foundation and the city, and then on big page 30, the recitation of the responsibilities of the city and the foundation after November 1 of 2019. So all of those entries there in those headings are consistent with what was in the lease agreement. Now, to get to your question, on big page 31 in section C, the heading reads, evaluate possible amendments to the foundation articles of incorporation and bylaws. And the first point is to review the articles of incorporation. The articles of incorporation are very general in nature in terms of stating what the purposes of the foundation are. The details and the procedures with regards to the foundation, the number of directors and how they're appointed and the qualifications for directors and such are in the bylaws. And what the transition plan indicates here is that during the transition, I'm using the word transition because it's contemplated that there would be a change from what the status quo is to what the lease agreement contemplates, so that during that transition period, there would be a review and possible revisions of the bylaws, and the indication here is there would be a review of the number of the directors to potentially eliminate director appointments by the council and allow the foundation to appoint their own directors, potentially a revision of the director qualifications, possibly eliminate the city liaison representatives, perhaps a modification to the annual reporting process, and perhaps other changes as well. So those are changes that could be discussed under the provisions in the bylaws. Amendments to the bylaws would require the approval by the city and by the foundation.
And it's my assumption that this transition period is the period that's already outlined in the lease, the period from August 1st to October 31st.
Yes, and afterwards as well. So there isn't basically a hard and fast date of when the transition period starts and stops. The period between now and August 1 would be the period that the lease agreement would be entered into. The period from August 1 to October 31, there would be a certain set of responsibilities, and then those would change as of November 1. So that's the transition, if you will. So the discussion about the bylaws and all the different points that I mentioned in my comments a minute ago could take place during this period of time between August 1 and October 31, or perhaps after.
And it's my understanding that the reason that where we have a lease agreement in replacement of an operating agreement and not actual amended bylaws or articles of incorporation, because that's not within the scope of this whole ad hoc process.
That's correct. The ad hoc process was intended to address the operating agreement and whether it should be modified or extended or terminated. And the lease agreement is intended to replace the operating agreement in many respects, and it also incorporates some of the language in the operating agreement at various points in time, as I indicated during my presentation.
That's all I have. Thank you very much.
Any other questions? Brian, I have one question, and I think, in my opinion, it's a legal question. So if, in fact, technically we've been served. We have a 90-day period. Will there, from a legal point of view, within the 90 days, will there still be negotiations taking place? And I know there's some legal stuff that's got to happen with that too. But within that 90 days, what constitutes, what can happen in that 90 days?
Well, there could still be negotiations between the city and the foundation with regard to the terms of the lease agreement during that 90 days. Obviously, since the city's received that notice, the clock is ticking. I think that's what Mr. Devlin said, and he's right, that as time goes by, there will need to be given some thought as to what's going to be happening in 3 months from now, because that sounds like a long time, but given what needs to be accomplished, it's not that long. So the direct answer to your question is the negotiations could be continuing, but you may want to also be thinking of a plan B.
Plan B
in the event that the negotiations were not successful.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Are there any other questions at this time? Okay. So with that, staff have anything else that they'd like to add? No? Okay. So let's open it up to council discussion here. Who'd like to start us off?
Well, I think as far as Sean and I go, you see the result of our work with staff on the committee. So I personally would like to hear other council members' comments on it before I say any more.
Okay. Any other council would like to start us off here? Would you like to start? Susan? Or Tony, do you want to start it off?
Goes to the runner?
Yeah. Okay.
Am I the runner or you? All right. I have some comments. First of all, I am hoping that everybody just takes a deep breath. That's number one. Number two, I agree with what Susan said a few moments ago, and that is when I look at the initial letter sent dated April 3, 2019, it's on big page 8 of the agenda packet, sent by the Foundation Board of Directors to the city. Susan phrased a question and an observation that it was her view that the city came at this not to burden the CRF, but to help it with its purpose. And then asked, what does the foundation want from the city? And I think Susan hit the nail on the head. Not to put too fine a point on it, I guess, since I'm talking about a nail. Some preliminary comments. First of all, a very sincere thank you to all of the foundation board members, to all of the docents, to all of the employees at the Ranch Foundation. You have spent hours and hours and hours of dedicated service to the ranch, and I appreciate it very, very much. It's a lot of hard work, and you're volunteering your time, and I recognize that. I also want to express of appreciation and value for the work of my colleagues on the ad hoc committee, because I don't see these issues, I haven't seen these issues or lived these issues firsthand. So I appreciate the work that Sean and Charlotte have put into this. Second preliminary comment, for me personally, the number one priority beats everything else. The number one priority for me on a long-term basis is preserving and protecting and enhancing the cultural and historical legacy of the Camarillo Ranch House. Everything else to me is secondary in importance, and I mean that sincerely. So we're talking here about the education programs, the cultural programs, and everything else. I'm putting it all in one big basket, Okay? And I think in a legal sense, so forgive me for reverting to occupational form, but I think in a legal sense, everybody can stipulate to that. It's really a question of how do you best get there? And what model do you use? Because there's been a particular model that's been used for many, many years, since the late 1990s. And what's fair to all concerned? What's fair to everyone? At least aspirationally, I'd like to see the foundation fully self-sustaining. Notice how I qualified that. And I recognize economic realities. But I also recognize that maintenance costs have increased and that the city may well have to pick up more of the burden, more of that burden. When I read Section 6D of the proposed lease agreement, that is precisely what the city has done. Sean's questions relative to the city picking up the interior, the recitation of the obligations on the foundation relative to the interior of the home, the furnishings, et cetera, which are all property, personal property, legally speaking, of the foundation, are all appropriate. But the structure, as I understand it, is the responsibility of the city. So, one of the challenges here among, and I'm sorry, I'm going to go for another minute or two. One of the challenges, among other things, is how do you split that out? You know, how do you apportion it between the parties? And if the city is picking up most of the cost of the maintenance, then we, in our role, in my opinion, in our role as stewards for the city, and looking after the Camarillo taxpayers, it's fair that the city keeps some of those revenues to offset the cost. It's not rocket science in that sense, and I think everyone would agree, at least I hope you would agree conceptually with that. Speaking for myself, I'd also like to see the foundation board operate independently without the appointments by the city council. I just conceptually don't have an issue with that. So, where are we on this? Well, at this point, the city made a lease proposal to the foundation. And two things happened in Charles, in your letter today. I'm not picking on you, but I'm going to refer to your letter specifically, Charles. So two things happened. One, the foundation rejected the proposal. Okay, I get it. I mean, I'm a lawyer. I've been practicing law for 36 years. I understand when another party rejects a proposal. But the foundation took a second step. It didn't just reject the proposal, it just served a termination notice. So instead of, on the one hand, providing a redlined lease with an alternative language that says, you know, we really don't like this language, we foundation really don't like this language, we'd rather have that language, the foundation just took step number two, which is to say, we've terminated the agreement. I think that's unfortunate. So where does that now put us? That now starts running the clock. So the clock is ticking. The city didn't run that clock. I'm not casting aspersions. The foundation is now terminated. Okay, so that's where we are. What I have not seen, Charles' letter was excellent. But what I don't see in the letter are any specifics on what the foundation wants. There is language about concerns. There's language in the third paragraph about what the concerns are, but they're not articulated in a fashion that at least I'm used to occupationally from a negotiation standpoint say, okay, the other side wants X, Y, and Z. They are articulated in a very, and this is not meant to be negative, in a generic way, and I get it. I understand that, but they've also provided the basis for a termination agreement, or I'm sorry, a termination notice that was just served on the city council a few minutes ago. So, where are we? Well, the notice, or Mr. Devlin's letter also says there's time for negotiations. Okay, so there's time for negotiations. So what I would say is I would encourage that if the foundation board has specific requests, because right now all you've said is, no, we've rejected it and we're terminating the agreement. If there are specific requests, I need to hear that from the foundation. This is just how I, as one individual council member, is coming at it. And I fully acknowledge that I come at it from a legal standpoint because that's my occupational hazard. But ordinarily, when another party rejects something, they normally say to you, here's what we want. And we don't have that in front of us. So I don't know what that is right now other than in a generic sense. So if it turns out that something can't be worked out okay, and we may go our separate ways in 90 days, and I heard Mr. Devlin's statement that they intend to seek legal counsel as to that issue. Okay, that puts another layer on the discussion. But what I'm advocating is that if the foundation board chooses to do so, that it provide the city with a specific proposal in red line form saying this is what we, the foundation board, can live with. And then we can evaluate it. Because right now the city doesn't have that. And then the parties would have some further discussions. And I'm saying this without, Charlotte and Sean have spent a lot of time, just like your board has spent a lot of time on it. I think it would hopefully be fruitful for the parties to spend some more time discussing this. But in order to do so, that's got to come from the foundation. And those are my comments.
Do you want me to have anything else? Okay, I'm going to make a couple of comments here. We have a long history with the legacy of Adolfo Camarillo in the city, and as long as I'm here, and I think most of the other residents here, that will continue to be the case here. And I've been up here long enough to remember that when we took over this house, we thought we could rehab it for $300,000. And we found out that we were a little bit low, needless to say. When you get into an older structure, you never quite know exactly what you're going to get into as far as the rehab here. And we did this willingly because obviously it's part of our heritage. It's one of the shining lights in our city here. And specifically, there was thoughts that we wanted to have it opened up to school children, of course. And we wanted to open it up to the public. And I think that the Ranch Foundation Board has done a good job on that. And there's been several volunteers that have spent hundreds of hours there. I would mention their names, but I probably would overlook somebody, and I don't want to do that. But there's been individuals out there that basically spent all of their retirement years out there working on that facility and that house, making it is what it is today. And we're all in this, in these chambers, we all support the ranch house, and we always will here. I'll refer a little bit to the letter, and my thoughts were, not being on the ad hoc committee, some of the questions might have been a little bit dicey, but we haven't had an opportunity to really have a total discussion because there's limitations with government entities to do that. So this is our opportunity to ask some questions, and they may be good questions, it may not be, they may be important, who knows? It's just questions that come up. You know, like my question was about the 90 days. You know, where do we go from here right now? And we were asked to help us. I mean, obviously the foundation needed some help. And we're here tonight to try to help. We want to be part of the solution. We don't want to be part of the problem here. And I think that's always been the vocal point here, is that we want to try to help this, try to make this better. So with that, my thoughts are that, we've been served. I'm not an attorney. We have been served, so now the clock is ticking. We've got 90 days, I think, to figure some of these issues out here. And that's where we are. I'm hoping the 90 days can be productive. I'm hoping that it won't get into finger pointing or anything else. This is a partnership here, and I've always looked at it as that. There's been some questions about the appointment process. I think Mr. Mulchay had asked that question about that's not typically part of a lease agreement. That's another discussion, for another day. I think we're very much open to a lot of ideas here. I mean, my thinking is I want to take revenue away that you don't feel that you'll be able to run your programs on that. So my thinking is we can always come back, the foundation can always come back and ask the city that they're going to need some more revenues to do their programs out there, of course, if they're not generating enough revenue. I'm in business. I understand, generating revenue is really, really important. I understand that. So, this gives us an opportunity now for 90 days. I would, as Mr. Tremblay had stated, if come back with some specific, issues that we want us to address here. We've addressed several of them. And I think the ad hoc committee has spent countless hours. The Ranch Foundation Board have been wonderful. We could not do it without your help. We wouldn't be where we are today without that. There's absolutely no question about it. So right now, I think it is a time to really start thinking about this and see where we want to go. I think we do have to see where the discussion goes, but another question is like a plan B as well is important to have in case within the 90 days that we can't come up with any kind of a conclusion in this. We'll have to, think about what we can do in the 90 days. And of course, as luck would have it, or as not luck would have it, we're going into the busy season now. And we want to make sure that all the activities that are going to happen this summer are going to be happening without any missteps here. So those are my comments. And if anybody else would like to have any other comments on that, or if we'd like to, Mr. Craven?
Yeah, well, first of all, I want to thank not just those in attendance, but all of the people who've been on the board and all of the people who have been docents for all of these years, because all of the past and present board members and docents and the other volunteers, family members and other people they brought to help are the ones who made the ranch what it is. When we took over the ranch, it was because a developer owned the property and it was a condition of development. So the city took it over, and frankly the house was in very, very, very bad shape. As Mr. Kildee said, we thought we could bring it up to something, and the city had always intended to do the structure, and the agreement was that the Ranch Foundation was going to take care of the interior. So we took care of the structure, and if I remember, it cost us about $1 million initially. And then we found out there was more. And then later we did the entire barn on the interior and exterior. But the Ranch Foundation Board is the one that went out and raised money. The city didn't provide money for it. They raised money and improved the interior of the house. The furnishings are period. They're not family things, not the things that were there, but that's the way it is in many, many museums. Or this is not a museum, but it's a living ranch house. They also found in closets and other places the patterns of the original, well, I don't know about the original, but at least the last wallpaper that the Camarillo family had. And they found the company that did it, and they replaced that. They did all that on their own by raising money. And we have always appreciated that because it is truly a gem here in Camarillo. Previous to that, people went by and they saw the house. part of the family was living in it, and then, or after the family lived in it, some of the people at the seminary, the seminarians lived in it for a long time. And frankly, that's when part of it became pretty downtrodden because there was no upkeep at that point. And some of the upstairs was damaged pretty much. But then when the Ranch Foundation took over, and it was in different parts, that upstairs that had been severely damaged by water damage from showers, group showers, that took a lot longer, and that was the second phase of the rehab. But they did it. You guys and the people before you did all of that. You did it on your own. You did it with fundraising. As I think it was Mr. Mulchay, but I'm not sure, said earlier, it was always anticipated that fundraising would take care of that kind of thing. The Ranch Foundation would be in charge of that. And the rental business was going to be taking care of the Ranch Foundation's share of the maintenance of the interior of the house and the grounds. The city still had responsibility for the exterior. So comments that have been made about we need this to the exterior, the city's been doing that all along, and if the city hadn't been doing it, it's only because they were not asked or because a problem was not brought to the city's attention on the exterior or the structural part of the building. We've always understood that was the city's responsibility. And so, well, I said the Ranch Foundation did all that. However, there was a $425,000 grant from the state that Assemblywoman Kathy Wright got before she left office, got for them. And they did the application and got that, and I give them credit for that because it's not easy to get money out of the state. It's only easy to give money to the state. My notes are a little bit random, but I agree with everything that Mr. Tremblay said. I believe that if the Ranch Foundation is interested in continuing negotiations, they need to take the lease agreement and give us a red line and tell us what they don't like, and not just say everything, but tell us how it would be in your druthers. Tell us what it is, how you want to change it. I don't see any other way to really continue those negotiations. There were some other comments made I want to address. The appointment of board members, that was not mentioned in the lease agreement because that's not in the operating agreement. So if we're changing the operating agreement, we're going to change things that are in there. That comes from something else, and I believe it's been our intent for quite a while to go in and change those bylaws and have that part of it changed so that the board would select its own board members and the city would be out of that business. In addition to that, the docents, I don't want you to feel that you were slighted by not being mentioned in the operating agreement. The docents are not part of a rental agreement. The docents are part of other things. They're part of cultural programs and educational programs, and they're a very, very, very important part of that. But the lease agreement is not where we talk about the docents, but we certainly recognize that the docents are important, and we hope that the docents will not as a group decide they don't want to participate with the ranch or whatever is happening at the ranch. We're talking about a lease agreement here. So I, too, believe that the very most important thing that needs to be preserved is the property. We need to maintain the education and the cultural programs. But I think that the board has to understand that by the city taking over all of the utilities at the ranch, all of the maintenance, at least for what we're proposing, is of all the property, including the barn, including the stables, or the offices as they're now called, including the landscaping and all of those trees, whether they're historic or not. With the city taking over all of that, we do need some of the revenue. The revenue was not intended to be what paid for the events. It was always expected that the events would be paying for themselves. So maybe there won't be free events anymore. I don't know what it is. Maybe there will be other fundraisers. I think we all have to put our heads together and come up with some other things. But I do believe that the city does need some of the revenue. And I think the final thing is that, you know, you might have turned the finances around, but you're still underwater. If something happened to that property tonight, if that earthquake last Wednesday had been much more extensive than just shaking all the dust out of the ceiling here and making it so that I had a terrible allergy attack, it could be that all those deposits would have had to have been refunded, and you don't have enough money to do that. You've been spending your deposit money, and so we're looking at that, and that's why we said you can keep all the deposits. We don't ask you to transfer any of those deposits. That's part of what we're offering you. So when you bring it back, keep that in mind. Keep other things in mind that you think will be agreeable, and give us a red line copy of the lease agreement if you are interested in continuing the discussions.
Okay. Santangelo?
I'm not going to take time to reiterate what has just been said, but I agree with Ms. Craven. Because I am still unclear as to what the foundation wants, and so I need to see that as well. I need a red line of what we've done so far, and let's take it from there and collaborate. I'm saddened that this felt at times sort of adversarial tonight. It's not. I can't speak for all of you, but I think I know you well enough, and I've seen the work we're doing, that it's not our intent to not work for the success of the foundation and for the ranch house at all. On the contrary, that is exactly what we want, is the success of the foundation and the continued efforts that so many people have put in over the years. We have to balance that, though, with the stewardship of the taxpayers' money, and so it's not just as easy as saying we're just going to help fund whatever shortcomings there are. We have to collaborate and partner together to figure out how to make this successful. And I think if we take it from that approach, that we problem solve together rather than go up against each other, then I think we'll be far more successful. So that's my hope. I hope that the foundation will come back with more specifics so that we can, really put our heads together and figure this out for our city. So I think we all have to commit to doing this together and not banging our heads against each other, but really, getting to work together and figuring this out. So I hope we do that. I hope we can get there. So that's where I am right now.
Anyone else? Mr. Mulchay?
Yeah, and my comments will be brief. Most of everything has already been said, and I agree with it. I don't mean my questioning to come off as adversarial. I do want what's best for the ranch. I want what's best for that property, for the preserving of the legacy, the celebrating the legacy, the educating the legacy. My wife takes her third grade class to the ranch house every fall. She loves the property. She loves the docents. I've taken tours of the ranch house. It is absolutely a treasure. In a lot of the public comments tonight, I heard a lot of heart. I heard a lot of passion and a desire to further the legacy of that property, of the house, of the Camarillo family. I don't want to take any of that away. That's not my intent. I don't want it one bit. I want to do what we can to embolden that. I want to do what we can to support that. I want more of that. I want to double down on it. And I want to see how the city can help by eliminating the liability and the costs of the maintenance, of the utilities, of the rental business, so we can focus on the core mission, the preservation, the education, the celebration. Because we all agree, both sides agree, everyone agrees. There is no qualms or disagreement on that point. That's what we want. It was my hope that what we had put forward was in support of that and in line with a lot of what was originally communicated to us via the initial letter. I want to embolden the docents. I want to embolden the volunteers. And I just want to drive home the core mission of the CRF. And I want to try to eliminate all those other distractions and all those other costs that drag that down and put the core mission at risk. And that is my intent. Thank you.
Any other comments from council members? Okay. What's the will of the council?
My view, Mr. Mayor, is that none of the suggested actions in the staff report would be appropriate to take this evening. My suggestion would be that the council just leaves this where it is and that no action is taken this evening.
So you're directing the ad hoc committee to continue to negotiate?
No, because I don't know what the Foundation Board of Directors, if anything, is going to do, so I'm not directing it. I'm hopeful that if the Foundation Board of Directors decides in its discretion to make some form of counterproposal to the city, that the ad hoc committee would review that together with the city manager and city staff. If you want me to frame that in the form of a motion, I can do that. Would you, why don't I take a shot at framing that one in the form of a motion?
Let me ask, before you do that, let me just ask a question of council. We did technically get served, so where does that stand with any deliberations that we can or cannot take?
Yeah, as I indicated previously, you can engage in negotiations, notwithstanding the receipt of that letter, and to reach an agreement. Now, we have a lease agreement. If there's going to be potentially modifications to that, come back to you. The intent of the lease agreement is to replace the operating agreement. So the fact that the operating agreement might be terminated is not an issue unless it terminates before you have another agreement. So you can continue negotiations during the 90-day period, but as I also said before, depending upon the timing of this, you're running up against a 90-day deadline that at the end of the 90 days, the operating agreement would be gone. So you will need to be giving thought to 2 points. One is the negotiations on a lease agreement or some form of an agreement. And then 2 is your backup plan. What happens if those negotiations are not successful? What are you going to do?
Okay. Does that help? But would that, if we're going to negotiate, we've got at least this potential negotiation points here, the operating agreement, would that be in the matrix of what we start to negotiate on? I mean, is this the start? Is this what we're going to negotiate this? And then perhaps if the Ranch Foundation would like to make some red line or any other additions, deletions, subtractions, whatever, they're able to do that within the 90 days. Is that correct?
Well, hopefully sooner than later. And I think what I've been hearing, and you're probably going to hear it from Mr. Tremblay in his motion, would be that there would be a request that the foundation would give red line comments, as we call them, proposed changes, if you will, to the lease agreement that's in your agenda packet. And as I said before, that lease agreement would be intended to replace the existing operating agreement.
And the 90 days starts?
Tonight.
Earlier than 9.
Okay.
The 90 days has already started. So here would be my motion. My motion is that I would move that if the Ranch Foundation Board in its discretion provides a counterproposal to the lease agreement to the city, that the ad hoc committee is authorized to review the proposal with city staff and make recommendations to the council.
I'll second that.
Okay, there's a motion on the table. There's a second. Is there any first discussion, any comments? Ms. Santangelo.
Do we need a motion about being able to work on a backup plan? Or
Well, there's two motions.
You could vote on one motion at a time.
Everybody understand the motion? Please vote. That passes 5-0. Okay. Now, is there another motion?
I'll make a second motion. I don't know. I'm kind of doing this free form, Susan. So, the second motion is that in the event, assuming that such negotiations occur, in the event that the negotiations are unsuccessful, that city staff bring a backup plan to the city council for consideration in the near future. I'm not going to put a specific timeline on it.
Okay.
Second that.
There's a motion. There is a second. Is there any further discussion on that? Okay. Please vote. That passes 5-0. Now, we have a, did you want to make a comment, or did you? Yes, sir, would that be appropriate to have Mr. Devlin make a comment, counsel?
Not really, but.
Yeah, he can.
Right.
Yes.
Proceed, please.
Thank you. Well, first, I just want to inform the council that prior to our last ad hoc committee, I did send a letter, email, to Charlotte, Sean, and Dave that identified what the foundation was looking for, what the end result needed to be. So if you haven't seen that, I'm sorry, but I'll be happy to provide it.
Yeah.
So the other thing is, thank you very much. We are most interested in continuing the negotiations because the foundation wants what's best for the ranch.
Okay. Mr. Tremblay had a little follow-up, if you would.
I was going to say thank you, Mr. Devlin, and thank you to all the folks from the foundation who have been here tonight. But that's not what I was referencing. I was referencing when I spoke about something that I'm more used to seeing in my line of work, which is a very specific form of written document that says we are asking for X, Y, and Z, and putting it as a redlined, putting it essentially as a redline proposal. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you,
All right.
Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. Yeah, Mr.
We've now
Yes.
We've now gone about 2 hours and 15 minutes. Could we please take a 5-minute recess before we go to the next item?
We'll be in recess.
I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay, I'd like to reconvene the meeting. I believe that gets us down to item C, which is the North Pleasant Valley Desalter Project, award of the construction contract. Do we have a staff report on this? Mr. Klotzel, will you take this one?
Yes, indeed we do. Mayor, thank you, City Council. It's with great anticipation that this item is presented to the City Council tonight. The project team on the desalter has been working hard for many years to get to this point, as you're well aware, including prior Public Works Director Tom Fox, Lucy McGovern, our Deputy Director of Public Works. We've all put in many hours on this, along with our team that's in place. We have our project management consultant, WSC Consultants, that's assisted the city thus far for several years. They are here and available in the audience for questions. Our design engineer, Brown & Caldwell, has put together a well-designed project, and they have a representative here also, along with a representative from our apparent responsive low bidder, William L. Lyles. Just wanted to mention that the team is here tonight for this presentation and for this item. So I did want to take a little time and refresh the history. I think it's fitting at this point. I'll keep it somewhat abbreviated. City Council has seen this information before, but just wanted to step through the project and the background. And starting off with the two groundwater basins that underlie the majority of City of Camarillo. On the southern, or for the majority of the city, on the southern basin is the Pleasant Valley Groundwater Basin, and then to the north, essentially separated from the other basin along the Camarillo Heights area is the Las Posas groundwater basin to the north. So some history to this project, that in the late 1990s, early 2000s, increased levels of salts were being detected in the city's wells A and B, which are north of Las Posas and between Ponderosa and Antonio up on the hospital area. Much testing and modeling showed a salt plume of brackish water that was originating from subsurface flows from Calleguas Creek, with the primary sources of the Simi Valley and Moore Park wastewater treatment plants, and also just flowing drainage water affecting the groundwater. During this time, Calleguas Creek was listed by the Environmental Protection Agency as an impaired water body due to a high salt concentration. The Regional Water Quality Control Board ended up issuing a salts TMDL for the Calleguas Creek watershed, which includes both Calleguas and Conejo Creeks, and the TMDL sets limits on salt levels that are discharged by wastewater treatment plants, including Camarillo's treatment plant that discharges to the Conejo Creek further downstream in the city. The salts in Camarillo's water supply make it impossible for our treatment plant discharge to meet the TMDL limits, so instrument that's put in place to achieve compliance is what's called a time schedule order, and that was negotiated with the regional board, and it includes specific items that need to be complied with, including an implementation plan to achieve reduction in salts in the Calleguas Creek watershed. One of the items that need to be achieved is to eliminate all wastewater treatment plant discharge from Camarillo's treatment plant to the Conejo Creek, and that really spurred on our recycled water program, where a large percentage of our treated effluent does get diverted out of the creek and to our recycled water customers. There's continued work towards getting 100% removed from discharge to the creek with an agreement that's in place with Camarosa, and the physical infrastructure and permitting through the board is soon to be in place that 100% of our flow can be diverted from discharge to the Conejo Creek. The other item that needs to occur is to treat the source water, the brackish groundwater, and hence the birth of the desalter project. Rather than treat it all at the downstream end in our treatment plant, which is extremely more costly, the desalter project was started, and essentially to improve our recycled water quality, and it also at this point identified the need for what's called the brine line, the Calleguas Municipal Water District Salinity Management Pipeline, which was since put in Lewis Road and flows downstream all the way out to Port Hueneme to an ocean outfall to discharge the brine from desalters that were going to be needed in the area. So groundwater modeling identified the eligible area for extracting the brackish water for treatment by a desalter, and shown in the area in orange is the eligible area for extraction and treatment. And the time schedule order deadline has been extended several times. The current expiration, staff was successful in getting that deadline extended to December 31st of this year. And so this is a big step in awarding the contract for the desalter by the end of the year is the requirement. And if non-compliance with the time schedule order opens the city up to penalties, which could range up to $10,000 per month, and that's for non-compliance with the time schedule order. So real quick, brief history from the early 2000s to the present. Performed quite a few groundwater supply studies. A feasibility study of treatment operations was prepared, identifying reverse osmosis as a viable candidate. A small-scale pilot testing occurred, and then a proposed facilities plan identifying the ideal treatment process, treatment stream for reverse osmosis was identified. Then to move forward and set the project scope, and to move into the SECA process, ended up with an environmental impact report with follow-up supplemental EIRs that were eventually all certified and adopted by the City Council. It also required a separate allocation to be granted by Fox County Groundwater Management Agency, and that occurred initially. The modeling and the plant sizing was geared towards a 9,000 acre-foot per year plant scenario. and moving through the approval process to get the allocation through Fox Canyon, the project was sized at 4,500 acre-feet per year of extraction, which yields roughly 3,800 acre-feet per year, which meets the city's needs for largely replacing our imported water demand at this point. So the project essentially was sized at 4,500 acre-feet per year. We moved into design with the hiring of Brown & Caldwell to move into project design, along with the site selection process and purchase of property for the project. And that property is located at the northwest corner of Las Posas Road and Lewis-Somas Road intersection, Somas Road to the north of Las Posas. And this is the roughly 5-acre site that was acquired. And the brine discharge point is here in the southeast corner out to the existing salinity management pipeline. And the site will take access off of Somas Road here through an easement through existing property. There's a strawberry stand here that a few people know about, and the access easement covers that area, providing an improved access both to the treatment facility and also the strawberry stand. The other so two components of the project: the treatment facility, which is the item before you tonight for award of a construction project. The project's been broken into another component is what we call the conveyance pipelines, and shown in blue are new pipelines that are required to bring the raw water from our wells A and B up Antonio, and then over Mar Vista through the library, high school area, and to the site. Along with that, we've reached an agreement with Pleasant Valley Mutual Water Company, has their own desalter project in the works. They've received the level of approval from the city to move forward with that, and they need discharge of their brine. So the yellow dashed line is the Pleasant Valley Mutual brine line. That's going to follow the same trench as the raw water line. And under agreement with Pleasant Valley Mutual, the city will be performing the design and the construction of that brine line, all fully reimbursed by Pleasant Valley Mutual through an agreement that's in place. There's also some storm drainage pipeline within this conveyance package that's required to drain the improved desalter site. So real quick review of the project site plan. We went into design and yielded this layout, very well laid out. We've got plenty of room to work with. And the concept being that this plant, the treatment facility, could be expanded in the future to treat more than the 4,500 acre-feet per year, up to the 9,000 acre-feet per year. Essentially, the room is provided. The vast majority of the improvements that are being constructed are only for the 4,500 acre-feet per year. There are some improvements that make sense to build now for that larger size in the future that aren't cost prohibitive at this time to do so. So that's been incorporated into the project design. So essentially the site is expandable to a 9,000 acre-foot per year project if that ends up being the case in the future to be feasible. So just a real quick overview of what's going to be on the site. These are representative examples. This is showing the pressure filters, one of the first steps for the water to go through a filtration process. Another step is the decarbonators, and another process that's required. This is representative of a reverse osmosis train, we call it, a filter train. There'll be numerous of those set up, and all that's going to be housed within a fully enclosed building. There's high pressure pumps that have to push the water through that treatment system, and they do get noisy, so those noisy pumps, the noisy operations are designed and have been fully enclosed in sound attenuating enclosures to address the noise concerns. And then we have chemical storage area, again covered and with full containment, separation of the different chemicals that are involved from a safety standpoint, providing the required containment needed, separation of chemicals, the separation of the feed and refilling of these vessels is all set up to provide a safe operation. That's the example of the finished water pump pumps that would then pump the treated water out into the city's water distribution system out into Las Posas Road is where the connection is going to occur. So some renderings of the views of the project. This is looking from Lewis Road towards the west, towards the front, looking at the front of the project with the administration control room, shop building here, and a parking area here with a solar-covered shade structure over the parking. A little bit closer view here, showing the entrance and the monument sign that's been included in the design. That'll be an item we'll discuss further in a little bit. Now this is looking from the northwest, or looking towards the northwest, essentially from the corner of Las Posas and Lewis Roads. And you see the layout of the site with the canopies and the structures housing the equipment. This is a view looking southeast, so this will be if you're at the high school area, looking southeast. And then looking directly east, there's a church property directly to the west of the desalter site, so this will be a view from above that church property or library area, looking that way. Original design included a solid masonry stucco finish with pilaster block wall and site landscaping on both sides of the wall around the project site. And then a rendering of the administration building, shop, providing a control room, conference room, meeting space, offices, restrooms. So the design was finished and was put out to bid, and bids were open December 5th, 2018. And the summary of the bidders and the bid amounts are listed there. The bid results came in higher than the engineer's estimated cost. Immediately after the bid opening, we did receive bid protests covering several issues raised by a couple of the bidders. And then on December 19th of 2018, City Council took action to reject all the bids and gave staff direction for a redesign effort to yield construction cost savings. Further meetings with Council were held to finalize the redesign efforts. And I will mention that these 4 bidders were all pre-qualified through a pre-qualification process. There are actually 7 bidders pre-qualified, and we received 4 bids back on December 5th as shown. So the redesign effort was started, and revisions to plans and specifications have now been completed. City Council did take action to approve those revised plans, and the main revisions are to implement cost savings measures with revising the perimeter wall to a slatted chain link fence, removing the landscaping and the monument sign. What we did is in the bid package included what we call additive alternate bid items that we listed these alternate items for the contractor to give a price of what would it cost to go from the chain link fence base bid to the block wall perimeter block wall, and also landscaping and the monument sign. So that information will be presented in the bid results, but we did want to have that opportunity to get that information and provide that in the revised bid documents. Some of the piping was revised, materials were revised to use less costly materials, and also we removed the LEED certification process. The bulk of the improvements stayed within the design that are energy efficient, like the solar panel, parking cover, and other improvements largely within the administration building remain in the design, but we've removed the LEED certification process, which had some cost to it also. We'll highlight that there were no changes made to the administration building. It was essentially a balance between how much would it cost to do this redesign compared to how much savings we would expect on a rebid. There are also several additional project elements that were included in the design revisions, and the surge mitigation system and the treated water and sewer pipelines were incorporated into the treatment facility. They had previously been in the conveyance package. An electrical service to the brine disposal metering vault is required, and the site entrance design per Caltrans requirements for the Lewis Road access need to be included into the design. So these are identified additional project elements. The ones that were actually, we had time to incorporate them into the new plans that were rebid is the sewer pipeline and the electrical service. The other items, the surge mitigation and the treated water pipelines and the site entrance are still need to be finalized, the design finalized, and those would be incorporated into the construction contract via contract change order. So as I mentioned, Council approved the revised plans on March 27, 2019, and authorized the advertisement of bids. Just wanted to highlight in this picture what we're talking about. The landscaping is the trees and I believe some shrubs along the wall. They're not shown here in this rendering, but the landscaping on either side of the wall, plus the block wall, were the items that were removed, but still kept in the bid package as a bid alternate. And then also what we're looking at for changing to a sort of rendering or sample of a slatted chain link fence. The materials are available that provides a pretty well sealed screen with the slats within a chain link fence. This would be an 8-foot chain link fence. So listed here are the revised bid results for the revised project. Bids were open on June 5th. And we received 2 bids, and William L. Lyles and Company is the apparent responsive low bidder with a base bid of $40,178,000. And then also listed a second bidder with the base bid, and then the additive alternate bid item. So what this means is for an additional $1,810,000 on top of the base bid, would be the cost to go, instead of the slatted chain link fence, to go with the perimeter block wall. Likewise, to incorporate the perimeter landscaping as previously designed, and the monument side would be these additive items. If council chooses to include those items in the contract award, the total would be $42,244,000. So the low bid is 10% lower than the previous low bid that was submitted by Parsons at $44 million. So both bids came in lower than the original low bid that was opened back in December. And we've had discussions with the contractors as much as possible and get a sense for why, what the bidding climate was and the the factors involved in the bids that we've now received being lower. One of the main items is, and we heard this before too in the previous bids, was that there was only a limited number of subcontractors that were providing bids to the prime, and they saw much more competition within the subs this go around, which generated some better pricing from the subcontractor work. Really hard to put a finger on exactly what and why things came down. Fortunately, that is the case. We are pleased to see a lower cost. As I mentioned in previous presentations, that there was no guarantee that they would come in any lower. But fortunately, this situation being that the bids have come in 10% lower than the prior low bid. The administration building, one of the bids, Shimmick's bid, essentially was about $300,000 lower on the admin building cost. Lyles, I believe, was right around $1.2 million lower than their previous or than the previous low bid on the admin building. So exactly why, there's can be how a contractor decides to bid the work and split up the scope of the work can have an effect, or these lower subcontractor prices can have effect on that also. So, we did put some effort into, if you will, a tighter specification, better descriptions on the, we learned some things on the first bid, so we were able to put the bid documents together with hopefully a little bit better to get these better bids. So now I wanted to, summary, obviously bid results are lower than the prior bids. No bid protests were received. And now I wanted to go over the estimated total project costs. and this will reflect some changes, including the more recent bids. But this is essentially comparing the numbers back from December 2018, including the low bid from December, and then now the June 2019 estimated cost. And this is all elements of the project from inception to completion of as best estimated as possible. So you can see the total dollar amount originally at $70 million total estimated cost, and now revised at $66 million, just a little over $66,284,000. I'll highlight a few, or the items that did change. The design, engineering, and environmental. Essentially, the main change there was additional redesign cost of roughly $145,000. Land purchase stayed the same. Support services increased slightly there. There were some actually decreases there as we looked at this includes funding assistance. The cost ended up being a little bit lower of what we ended up spending there. We do expect our legal costs to continue, so we increased some there. We still have some easements to work out for the pipeline conveyance work, so there was a slight increase in the support services. The treatment facility, this gets us to the bulk of the cost at the showing the bids. These are the December and then June bids, including a 10% contingency on the low bid amount. The conveyance pipeline to storm drain, the $1.5 million was a number that we've been had as a placeholder for some time, and as we're progressing through that design and updating that number, we felt it appropriate to increase that to be more in line with actual costs that we expect on the conveyance pipeline and storm drain work. No change on anything else until we get down to this one, but I did want to mention the SMP connection that's listed there. There is a correction in the staff report. I left out the letter S on big page 6. It says MP connection in the table. That's supposed to be the SMP connection. That's the connection to the Brine Line Salinity Management Pipeline, so just an administrative correction there. On down to the other change, roughly a little over $400,000 of increase. Again, as we progressed forward through the redesign and getting a better handle on the estimates of what it's going to take for our project management costs, the design engineer, we're going to retain the design engineer through the construction of the project for their services, and then also expected costs for construction management and inspection. So the contingencies are all included within the numbers above, getting us to that total of the new total of $66,284,000. I will mention the soft costs. If you add up the top 3 items and the project management item that's highlighted here, totals $13,638,000, and that's right at 21% of total project cost of the $66.2 million. In previous presentation, I commented on that expectation for soft costs, all soft costs inclusive of a project this size, is between 20 and 30%. So at 20%, we're right there at the expected level of soft costs to implement this project. Moving on to the funding sources for the project, based on this $66.2 million cost, as been presented to Council before, the mix of funding that we'll be using for this project is capital water fees at $18.3 million, unrestricted water funds at $15.2 million. We have the grants that are in place, the Prop 1 and Prop 84 grants that we've had for some time at a total of $15 million. And then recently this spring, the award of the federal USBR grant at $5 million. So with all that funding gets us to the need for covering the difference with a water revenue bond issuance right at $12.7 million. And Council has taken action already on that to initiate those proceedings. We're working with the bond team on working up all the necessary documents to move forward with the bond issuance should Council decide to award this project. Wanted to touch on the some of the cost offsets that we're looking to achieve with the Metropolitan Water District Local Resources Program. I believe I described this in further detail previously, but essentially The LRP provides funding for the development of water recycling, groundwater recovery, and seawater desal supplies that replace an existing demand or prevent a new demand on metropolitan imported water deliveries. Essentially, funding through the LRP is based on the actual annual capital and operations costs of producing water, like through the Camarillo's desalter, and that will keep the, help keep the cost of water produced from the project below the cost of imported water over the 20-year life. So the estimate, again, real rough estimate, approximate savings over 20 years through the LRP. And again, that's funding that's received on an annual basis as we submit the documentation that shows what the cost of desalter water is. We expect to save $25 million, and that we would be getting in essentially funding from that program. And then also just the lower cost, overall cost of water per acre foot over 20 years compared to imported water. So the desalter water will yield additional savings of $30 million for a total expected savings over 20 years of $55 million. Now this is at the funding scenario here, levels of funding. It would definitely be more if we achieve additional grant funding, and we are pursuing. Right now, we're working on the next funding application for the Bureau of Reclamation grant, which is available again. It's 25% of the total project cost, so total grant that we will qualify for is $16.5 million, and so we are going to be applying for that remaining $11.5 million in grant funding. That would, and if we do achieve grant funding, that would just obviously drive up the amount of total savings. And just in comparison also, if we do not move forward with the desalter, we would obviously lose this savings that would be realized by implementing the desalter. And then also we would be continuing to pay imported water prices for that 3,800 acre feet per year. And over 20 years with a relatively conservative increase in rates from Cayugas at 4%, it would put us up at about $160 million we'd pay for over 20 years for 3,800 acre feet of water for imported water. So, summary of next steps is the item before you tonight for award of contract with or without alternate bid items. We would then look to execute the contract and get all the documentation in place that's needed to issue a notice to proceed over the next couple months, with construction starting estimated in September 2019, and then for about 2 years, including a startup process that needs to be gone through and certified and approved by the state to be able to implement the actual treated water into our system. So looking at construction completion and startup of delivering water in the latter part of 2021. The additional project elements, like I said, will be developed and design finished and incorporated into the project via contract change order. And then the conveyance pipeline, that second package of the project, is continuing on in design, and we'll go through a separate bid and award process that would come back to council for approval. So with that, the future council actions also include bringing on Brown & Caldwell throughout the completion of construction for engineering services during that period of construction. As a design engineer, they need to review submittals. They need to review any revisions. So there's an element that the design engineer plays throughout construction, including the record drawings at the very end to and end up with a record of what was actually constructed with any changes. We'll be coming back with construction management services consultant contract. And then also we are working up the final touches on the scope of work for our contract operator selection. We've gone through a qualifications-based selection process with a short list of qualified contract operators that we'll be issuing that RFP to in the near future. Also wanted to summarize the benefits of the desalter. So this project treats an unusable source of water, enhancing long-term supply stability, and is a major step towards compliance with our regional SALT TMDL, not only benefiting the city of Camarillo, but this SALT TMDL is for the entire Cayugas Creek watershed. And so it is a significant item and step towards compliance with improving the situation within the watershed in regards to the salts concentrations. We will be able to fully reuse the impaired wells. Right now we're pumping very little out of our existing wells because of the high level of brackish water that needs to be blended. So we'll be able to fully reuse our existing wells using that additional allocation from Fox Canyon that's above and beyond what we'll still be able to pump out of our other wells, well 3 out of the airport and well D over by Las Posas and the 101. And then, of course, the lower cost of water overall will reduce the future escalation in the overall cost to provide water, which would have a positive effect on the rate situation going forward. So with that, suggested actions tonight are, 1, to authorize the city manager to execute a public works contract with William L. Lyles for construction of the North Pleasant Valley Desalter Project treatment facility for the total base bid amount of $40,178,000, and execute contract change orders for project contingencies in an additional amount not to exceed $4,017,800 for a total authorized expenditure of $44,195,800, or an action to include all or a selection of the alternate bid items is what's added in here. Essentially same action for the base bid of $40,178,000 plus additive alternate bid items as directed by City Council up to an additional amount of $2,066,000, along with contingencies for change orders in an additional amount up to $4,224,400 for a total maximum authorized expenditure of $46,468,400. So that concludes my report, and I and any of the team that may be necessary to answer any of your questions are available.
We'll start questions. We'll start with Mrs. Craven tonight.
Yeah, the part of the project where the desalter pipeline for Pleasant Valley Mutual and the, I guess that's the wrong term, but anyway, their brine line and our water lines are going along. Is that going to be any kind of a cost savings for us?
To include their?
Is that saving us any money on trenching by them reimbursing us for some of it, or?
No, I mean, the reimbursement would be for the additive cost. We're going to be digging a trench to put our pipeline in, and it will accommodate their pipeline also. So,
But in order to accommodate their pipeline, it's costing more to build a bigger pipeline, or they're taking away from some of the cost of our having dug the pipeline?
Yeah, I mean, there'll be somewhat of a shared cost, right, to have them in the same trench as us also.
Okay.
Right.
That was the only question I had.
Dave, I have one question before I get to the others. When we, to a certain extent, repackaged this, my understanding we had 2 bidders, and what happened to the other bidders that made a bid in December that didn't make a bid this time?
Good question. We did reach out as much as possible to gain some of that information. Essentially becomes a contractor business decision. No real specific items to be able to share with you tonight that would say why one chose to bid and one didn't. It really ultimately comes down to the bidding climate, the amount of work that's out there, the projects that the other contractors may have been successful on recently. So it's just really their own business decision.
And the fact that we didn't have a protest and then said the bid was a fair and equitable bid, then it was.
Correct. Yeah, and I will add, even with the previous 4 bids that all came in pretty well tightly grouped, there's a good indication of essentially a well-designed, well-put-together project that's able to be bid accurately. And with a pretty tight grouping. Same thing with our 2 bids we received here. Less than 10% apart, right about 5% apart on those 2 bids. So that's a good indication of a solid bid.
Mr. Moshe?
Yeah, Dave, I just want to say I want to thank you and your staff and the time that you guys have spent on this. I know we've dragged it out, but I think it's been rather fruitful. As proposed in this, the chain link fence, is that still going to stand as tall as the originally planned block wall?
Yes.
And it's still going to be on top of I know we were going to raise the grade. It's going to stand on a mound.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. Yeah, it'd be
So-
mounted.
So that's unchanged. That's all the same. In regards to the additive alternate bid items, when it came to the perimeter landscaping, was the landscaping, the proposed landscaping, or the one at least that comprises this number, $170,000 from WM Lyles, is that landscaping around the entire facility?
Yes, that's correct. Well, actually, the additive item is we didn't change the front landscaping, which there's not, it's not a full stretch of wall like the other three sides that are fully landscaped, but there is landscaping in front of the building, and then that section of wall, and that will also remain wall to the north. So the frontage of the property will be building, block wall, and landscaping.
Okay, so that's already included in the bid. That's not part of the additive. The additive is the other three sides.
Correct.
That don't affront Lewis Road.
That's correct.
Got it. And is any of that comprised of landscaping within the wall, and within the chain link fence?
The additive was on both sides of the wall and fence, yes.
Is the majority of that landscaping on the exterior, though?
I believe so. I recall seeing the plan at one point, but I know it was a mix. But I think there was, I think the bulk of it is on the outside to provide that screening from the exterior.
And the landscaping also includes all the irrigation necessary to keep the landscaping alive.
That's correct.
Okay. One thing I didn't quite understand, in the additional project elements for council's big page 4, additional project elements, you said 2 of these were included now in this new bid.
Correct.
And then which 2 were not?
So, yeah, a little bit of history on how that happened. So as we were pushing quickly to get design completed and out to bid when our previous deadline was December 31st of 2018, we got the project to the point where it was biddable with the bulk of the items, with these additional project elements still known that it needed to be finished. The design would need to be finished, especially for the project that was bid, and we opened bids in December. So these items all would have still needed to be finished design. Now, with the redesign effort, we're able to include one of the sewer pipeline.
So it's treated
part of that. It's treated water and then the sewer pipeline. So it's 2 different elements of pipeline. That work had been previously arranged to be in the conveyance pipeline package, but since it's site-specific and ties into the treatment facility, it makes sense for the treatment facility contractor to build that. So the sewer pipeline design was included in the revised design documents, as well as the electrical service connection to the brine disposal vault. The other items take significantly more amount of work and time that we weren't able to incorporate at this time into the final design. That design is proceeding and will be incorporated as by change order.
So the treated water and sewer pipelines, the electrical service connection to the brine disposal vault are included in this new bid, the bid that we have from WM Lyles.
Not the treated water.
Oh, just not the treated.
Just the sewer pipeline
just
of
the
that.
Sewer pipeline and the electrical.
Right.
But for the other ones, the surge mitigation system, the treated water, and the site interest modifications per Caltrans requirements, we still account for those. We still anticipate those costs in our overall budget.
That's correct.
That was part of that. I forget what it was called. $600,000. If you go back, there's a line item for $600,000, and so we're anticipating. Those are built into our budget, although they're not included in the bid.
That's correct.
Okay, I just want to make sure. This may be a question for you and/or the contractor. I don't know to what extent, these things aren't all that common. These kinds of facilities and whatnot, and all the different materials that comprise of them. I don't know to what extent they are imported or come from, foreign countries. So I'm not. To the extent that they're made in America, I guess there's no big real issue. To the extent that they are imported from foreign nations, that right now tariffs are being floated about. There are some tariffs and there are other proposed tariffs. Do these costs include the current tariff market landscape, whatever situation?
Right. By nature of, we've asked the contractor to give us the price for what it's going to be to build this. and over the next 2 years, and this is the price that's going to be within the contract and they'll be held to. So that would include that.
That is pretty much all I got. So is it fair to say that, so with this, we're going to be providing residents better water, lower cost water, and then now we're going to have a more sustainable water supply. And then the $55 million in cost savings over 20 years, those $55 million in cost savings are going to be passed, effectively they are going to be passed to the ratepayer. We anticipate those cost savings in the form of the rate of the cost of water. Your bill is not going to, it's not anticipated that it's going to increase over those 20 years at the same rate of imported water or state water. That's where that's the form of most of these cost savings.
Correct.
Okay. So I just want to make that really clear that these cost savings are going to impact the ratepayer. It's going to help their pocketbook. So, okay.
Anything else?
Yeah, thank you.
Ms. Tremblay? 2 questions and a request. Both of my questions are on big page 7, so they're basically with regard to the financial aspects, not the bid itself. With regard to the METS, MWD's local resource program, and the funding of that, it indicates that the city has applied for that. And I know you spent a little bit of time on the slide. My understanding is the application is made. Is there a formal approval process for that?
Yes, yeah, we're actually getting really close to having a final agreement. There's actually an agreement we enter, and it's a 3-way because we buy the water technically from Cayugas, through Met to Cayugas. So it's an agreement between Metropolitan and effectuated through Cayugas and Camarillo to enter into that agreement.
Okay, and it's a reimbursement. It's a reimbursement on the back end basis, correct?
Correct.
In other words, you spend. Go ahead.
Annual, right?
Annually. Does the city apply annually?
No. What we've done is applied, and will be the LRP agreement will be in place that then has the provisions set forth that we need to follow to submit annually the required documentation to show what it's costing, both capital and operations, to produce desalter water. And then that's going to end up showing it's higher cost than what Metropolitan's wholesale cost essentially is to Cayugas, and there's a maximum difference that we will be reimbursed for per acre foot of water.
That delta?
Correct.
Okay. Second question is this, and it's there's a sentence in the second paragraph on C7. It says, therefore, the cost, and this actually supplements Sean's questions. Therefore, the cost of the project is not expected to generate a need to increase future water rates solely as a result of constructing the project. That choice of verbiage is interesting to me. Is it fair to say that water rates, though, would increase or could increase partially as a result, partially attributable to this project?
Possibly. Again, that would be borne out of our annual analysis of our rates that we perform every year, taking into consideration the revenues, the capital costs, staffing costs, operational costs. So,
okay.
Right.
Right. That takes nothing away from the water saving side of the equation. I get that part, and that's what Sean's questions. I heard him ask about that from a long-term water saving standpoint. I'm thinking more about from a year-to-year grinded out rates. That's why I'm asking.
Right. So, I mean, we need to be careful not to say that this project will, eliminate any future rate increases. That's not the case. The rate analysis is going to show cost of producing and providing water for the entire city water system will be what it is, and there could be a possible need for rate adjustment in the future. We just expect it to be less of an escalation with having this project in place, which is essentially lower cost water.
Which is why I asked you the question, because my concern was in reading that sentence and parsing out the words. It didn't. I was a little concerned. Okay, so one observation and one request. Observation is, I think Sean has hit the nail on the head relative to the benefits, and I know that the benefits of the desalter were up on the PowerPoint, but would you agree that the other primary benefit of this desalter project is environmental? Because what it will do is not only meet the regional board's time schedule order, which the city is under relative to its NPDES permit, but it also is a win-win in the sense that it's cleaning up brackish groundwater in this groundwater basin. And that's an environment, that is, from an environmental standpoint, very important. Would you agree with that?
Yes, correct. Essentially being able to use a currently unusable long-term supply of water.
Okay. Finally, my request to my colleagues, and that is that when it comes time to do a motion on this, I would appreciate if we could do this over the course of 2 motions, one with regard to the base bid and the other with regard to the additive alternate items, because I have a somewhat different feeling on both. And this goes back to our really difficult discussion on rebidding this project and how we all came out on that. Thanks.
Comments?
Any other questions? Okay, let's get down to comments. Ms. Craven?
Yes, I have comments. Last year, Lucy told us that we had been working on this project, or at least talking about it, for 18 years. So I guess I've been part of the discussion for 19 years now. And I do have to say that last December prepared me, because we had talked about $28 million and $35 million, and it had been going up through the years. But I wasn't prepared last December for the amounts we got, especially when you added in cost of property and all the other things that we'd already done. However, tonight, after having gone through last December, it's not quite as bad. So I can support this. I think it's important to point out, because people seem to not hear it ever. So for those of you listening in television land, I think everybody who's in here understands that or doesn't care. The only people who this will affect in one way or another are city water customers. The general fund isn't going to be paying for this. It's going to be paid for by people who buy their water from the city. And that's the way it should be. But we've had some comments, public comments recently about all the taxpayers paying for this, so I want to make that clear. I'm glad that Mr. Tremblay asked for 2 motions in case he's interested in something else, because I can support the base bid to W.M. Lyles and Company as presented to us in the packet.
Any other comments? Mr. Mulchay?
I'll be really brief. This is probably my favorite meeting thus far on the desalter, on the topic of the desalter. So it's always good when the number goes down as opposed to continues to inch upward. So I know just the general nature of construction. It's becoming increasingly more expensive to build anything. I know that firsthand in the industry I'm in. And so, but I do want to applaud my council colleagues and staff. I'm really glad that we did take the action we did several months ago, and we said these numbers weren't right. We were not comfortable with them. We just didn't like the situation, and we rejected the bids, and we took a second look at how we could save some money and revise the scope of this project. It doesn't negatively affect one iota the purpose of it, which is to clean up the groundwater, to serve cleaner water to city water customers and the like. We just simply, we fixed more of the ornaments, whatever, around the project. So I'm really glad that we took a second look at it. I'm really glad that the bid came back $4 million lower than the lowest bid, last go around. And I also like to say that I'm glad that we're going to separate this in 2 motions, because I also have a suggestion or an ask when it comes to the additional elements. But otherwise, I can support the original motion, the base bid for W.M. Lyles.
Comments?
I echo what's been said already. This was one of the, I think one of our, Mr. Mulchay and I's first meetings, and I remember seeing those numbers just going, whoa, and it was, yeah. So I'm glad that we took our time, even though it was a little, I mean, until these numbers came back, I wasn't sure what was going to happen. So thank you. Thank all your staff for looking at it again with us, and I can support this. So.
Let's make a couple of comments. There's a lot of zeros in this, so I can certainly understand the angst about this. My hope is that we still apply for grants, and if there's any other grants, we, in my opinion, have done very well with the grants so far, and hopefully we'll continue to pursue this. But if you look at the long-term benefits to this, I think they outweigh by far and away some of the short-term, costs that we had. I think we've been very fortunate that we moved forward and delayed this and tried to get a little bit of the sharpening of the pencil. It looks like we've been successful on this. So, again, we've been dealing with this for a long time, and I think this is a real special time in the city's history here to hopefully be able to go forward with this. Mr. Tremblay.
Yeah, I would also like to thank staff very much for all of your work on this. Thank you to our consultants. And I also want to thank Mrs. Craven and Mr. Kildee in particular for is it really 19 years? For all of the years on this, and Charlotte for your service on the Fox Canyon Groundwater Management Agency, because that is an extremely important link in this whole chain relative to receiving permission to do it. I want to also thank some of our prior council members for their determination to see this through, particularly Bill Little and all the work that he did on this. So if it's appropriate, Mr. Mayor, I'd like to go ahead and make a motion. My motion is to authorize the city manager to execute a public works contract with W.M. Lyles Co. for construction of the North Pleasant Valley Desalter Project WT-11-01 treatment facility for the total base bid amount of $40,178,000 and execute contract change orders for project contingencies in an additional amount not to exceed $4,017,800 for a total authorized expenditure of $44,195,800.
Second.
There's a motion on the table. There is a second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, please vote. That passes 5-0. Would there another motion in order? I had heard that we wanted to do two.
Well, at this point, I want to seek a little bit of guidance from Mr. Pierik. I'm not in support of the additive alternate bid items. Would the preferable approach, there's two approaches here. One is to not do a form of second motion and leave that on the table, or secondly, to do a form of second motion, which is to say that the council is not supportive of adding the additive alternate bid items. From a legal standpoint, does it make a difference which approach we select?
Well, no, although it would seem that the most appropriate procedural action would be to see if anybody wants to make any other motions. If nobody makes any other motions, you're done. Okay. If somebody else makes a motion and gets a second, then you're going to vote on it. If they don't get a second, then there won't be a vote.
Got it.
So the question that the mayor can ask is, does anybody else want to make another motion?
If anybody want to make another motion? We also have a question. So what constitutes that? In other words, we're not going to do what? What aren't we going to do?
Well, the second suggested action was to include the additives, but the motion that has been made by Mr. Tremblay did not include the additives. So all you need to do is ask. All you need to do is ask the council. Does anyone want to make another motion?
I will ask the council, do we want to make a second motion to add those?
I almost want to make a suggestion, which may turn into a motion. Seeing that we are going to a slatted chain link fence, and some of my questioning kind of led onto it in regards to the perimeter landscaping. And we have landscaping in the front that fronts or faces Lewis, but as it pertains to perimeter landscaping along the other three sides, two of which do border properties, one the Mormon Church, the other one being that former LA Workout, now being renovated to medical offices or something like that. One concern is whether or not how that necessarily looks. I'm not really fond of landscaping within the boundary of the fence. I don't see how that's necessary. I don't think that's going to be appreciated by anyone other than the one guy or two guys who's out there maintaining the facility. But when it comes to exterior landscaping, I don't know if we want to proceed with trying to provide some cover with what is obviously a not as beautiful perimeter boundary. I'm definitely not in favor of the perimeter block wall. We thought that was going to be $1 million, and it came out to 1.8, so it's certainly off the table in my book. Double gold-plated. But I didn't know if there was any support amongst my council colleagues to explore, and we don't even need to do it now. I guess we could pull the trigger on it sometime down the road, but whether or not there was any interest in enhancing the perimeter landscaping as a result.
Well, we could, not having seen the total design of the landscape here. My thinking is there's probably some landscaping inside it for dust mitigation, if you will, things of that nature. But I have not been able to see exactly what the landscaping is going to entail.
Not unless we add it.
Yeah.
So, yeah, and the reason I kind of make the suggestion is I don't necessarily know what all constitutes that landscaping, exactly what, of this $170,000 figure, what exactly that constitutes. What does it look like? What does it include? Does it do much of anything to obscure the slatted chain link fence?
Right. It would definitely add to screening, additional screening there and screening the chain link fence. I guess I'd have to defer to the city attorney if there is the opportunity to postpone the decision to add alternate bid item later, or is there timing constraints on?
What would have to happen is that it would have to come back as a change order, because what you're approving tonight, based on the only motion that I've heard, is the base bid. So if the contingencies, are you contemplating that would include change orders? So you would not need to come back to the council for authorization on that, or do you want to come back to the council?
Well, I suppose one way to approach it would be to provide the authority now to move forward and award it at the alternate bid item at $170,000, and typically we add on contingencies for that also. However, we may be okay not doing that, knowing that with direction from council to come back with a presentation on what the landscaping would really entail, and with the ability to obviously it would be added to the contract by change order, or it could be with a revision to what's on the plans and what's been bid. If that's
It sounds like that's going to be a change order, and it could come back to the council later.
Correct.
Yes.
In that case, I'd almost prefer go that route, saying that I don't necessarily want to vote on something $170,000 worth if I don't truly understand what exactly it does.
Well, let me just say I couldn't support it in any case.
Somehow I don't think we're going to hear a motion on this.
I don't either, so let's.
I won't propose one, no.
Next item.
All right. So, okay, so that gets us, let's see, that gets us down to item D.
Did we vote on that? Oh, we don't
did.
vote on that.
No,
We
didn't
voted
vote
on the
it.
first
We voted on
one.
the first. So that gets us down to item D. It's the Clean Power Alliance rate increase. Do we have a staff report on that?
Yes, Mr. Pichardo will give the report on this item.
Let me make sure the microphone's on, Roger.
Brian has it.
I gave it to Carmen.
Pass the clicker.
All right, good evening, Mayor, council members. Tonight's item is to go over the Clean Power Alliance rates that were recently adopted by the CPA Board of Directors. So on June 6th, 2019, the CPA Board of Directors approved an adjustment to the 2019 rates for all its customers to cover the following costs. New generation rates that typically take effect in January. However, there was a delay due to the Energy Resource Recovery Account trigger proceeding. What that is essentially forecasting, for example, the cost of fuel to generate power and power purchase for customers for the subsequent year. Changes to the PCIA exit fee reflecting the 2019 costs, and a new methodology that was adopted last year. The PCIA is a power charge and difference adjustment that Southern California Edison assessed to cover generation costs acquired prior to a customer's change in service provider. So a change in service provider meaning that a Southern California Edison customer changes over and becomes now serviced by the Clean Power Alliance. The implementation of CPA's June rate change results in an increase of approximately 3.4% to the average total rates paid by the CPA bundled customers. The CPA rates were adjusted on June 6th in order to maintain bill comparison ranges for most customers, with the exception of a small subset of commercial rate classes, which we will refer to as subset customers, and to continue to generate revenue needed to cover ongoing costs. Here we have subset customers that are impacted. The new rates for large phase 4 customers, which represent less than 1% of CPA customers, which is approximately 1,200 customers, affect the rate classes listed below and are based on CPA's cost to serve rather than keeping in line with Southern California Edison rates. So you have your time of use rates here, rate classes, and as a result of setting rates based on CPA's cost of service, this causes customer bills to fall outside of the previously approved rate comparison ranges when energy rates are lowest in the months of January through May and October through December. The previously approved ranges would remain intact during the summer months when energy rates are typically the highest. The city has numerous accounts in the aforementioned rate classes, which will be adversely impacted. We'll go through those in the next couple slides. So the new rates also increase rates dedicated for the following outdoor lighting rate classes: the LS1s, the LS2, LS3s, OLs, and the AL2s. The LS1s are, see here, they're typically Southern California Edison owned lights. The LS2s are city owned lights, and the others are area lightings. And so the ones that are mostly affected, well, the cities are the LS1s and the LS2s. CPA did not match Southern California Edison's new lighting rates for the above rate classes to avoid revenue shortfall for CPA and to prevent cross-subsidy amongst CPA customers. The city has numerous accounts in the aforementioned rate classes which will be adversely impacted. The city has approximately 326 electricity accounts that were previously serviced by Southern California Edison. And as of May 1st, all of these accounts are serviced now by the Clean Power Alliance unless the city does opt out all or certain of these accounts. It is anticipated that 108 accounts will be impacted if the city continues to be serviced by the Clean Power Alliance for the specified accounts shown in the table below. So here we have the different rate classes in this column to your left here. We have the number of service accounts, totals 108. The annual cost is approximately 1.7 million, a little bit above that. And then we have the column which shows the anticipated percentage increase for each of these rate classes, and the revised annual cost column. And then the one column to your far right is the total annual increase that the city would have to bear the burden if the city does not opt out of the CPA. So tonight's suggested action is to authorize the city manager to opt out of the Clean Power Alliance for city accounts in rate classes shown here, LS1, LS2, LS3, and the TOU rate classes no later than June 24th, 2019, and return the impacted electricity accounts to Southern California Edison's bundled service. That concludes staff's report. Be happy to answer questions.
Mr. Tremblay? Oh, you have a question? Anybody have questions?
I have a question.
Ms. Craven?
Yeah, I don't know, it was some time ago that a letter came through in council mail from the CPA explaining this, and it talked about large power users. And so these seem to be street lights and other things. I really don't have any other than the things you explained, any idea what all these classifications numbers really are. But my question is, do any of these include, or if not, does our treatment plant use a lot of electricity?
Yes, the treatment plant does. It's actually one of the top users.
And is it one of these?
It is actually, yes, it is. It's, I don't know right off the top of my head, but I think if Karen might have the list of all the accounts that are, yeah, we talked about it. I think we talked about this last week prior to the study session, and I think that was the number one.
It seemed to me that it should be a whole lot, well, right up there with streetlights.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's included. Thank you.
Any other questions? Ms. Nintendo?
I just have a more general question to help my understanding. What is the effect of multiple accounts opting out of the CPA? Does that make sense? Does it?
Actually, the way that it was explained during the CPA board meeting is that if there would be basically, if they don't opt out, there would be a subsidy. The residential accounts would be subsidizing these 1,200 accounts, and that's not the way that CPA, philosophy is based on.
Okay, I know what you're answering. I think I was asking something different. Is there, maybe not. Is there an effect to, is our opting out of this, I'm assuming that there are going to be other cities that do the same or other large usages.
Correct. The CPA has actually sent out a notice. The city received a notice, as well as all of the other cities and large businesses that will be impacted. And the advice that was given by the CPA was encouragement to opt out, because if they don't opt out, they're going to be paying a substantial amount more above what they would be paying if they go back to Edison.
Mr. Mayor, Councilmember Tremblay sits on the Finance Committee, and I think he's probably best informed as to the macro level question that Councilmember Santangelo just asked about the overall effect of multiple accounts opting out of CPA. Plus, I think at this point in the conversation, his background information could really answer a lot of questions ahead of time. So, Mr. Tremblay.
Boy, with that kind of buildup, I don't know. I want to also recognize that we have Karen Schmidt from the Clean Power Alliance with us here tonight, and thank you, Karen, for being here. And Roger, thank you for your staff presentation. Little did I know about 18 months ago when I volunteered to be the council member on this brand-new Joint Powers Authority, that I would be spending the amount of time and hours that Charlotte and Sean spend on the Camarillo Ranch Foundation and all of us spend on other things.
Yeah, but you've been doing it longer.
But that's with tongue-in-cheek. Susan, I think the bottom line, I have some specific comments, but I think the bottom line answer to your question, if I understand it correctly, and that is that from a budgetary standpoint for 2019-2020, the Finance Committee was essentially looking at about a $1 billion revenue budget with spending about $950 million or $975 million, I believe, for energy costs. Because of the anticipated opt-outs associated with these about 1,800 large users, that budget forecast has been revised downwards to around, and I believe, Karen, it's about $750 million a revenue budget and about a 700 and just slightly under that expenditure budget. In other words, proportionately, to the extent that you've got these users, large users opting out, which, by the way, by user percentages represent about 1% of the Clean Power Alliance customers, whereas 99% of Clean Power Alliance's customers are residential and small business. However, because they're large users, they represent a pretty large portion of the load, the electrical load for clean power. Anyway, I'm sorry about going on at length. Does that answer your question, though? Because, in essence, there will be less energy from a revenue standpoint, but less expenditures on energy. Does that make sense?
It does. Okay.
So, you know, and if I can go ahead and just make some comments, because I'm the one who I'm the one who goes to these meetings. But this is I have learned an awful lot in a very short period of time, and topics that I really had no prior professional experience with, particularly the energy markets. This was precipitated, and it was really unfortunate, as we learned in our study session, that Clean Power Alliance had to implement a rate increase earlier this month, which affected all of these Phase 4 non-residential customers, about 1,800 large users. But if that didn't happen, if Clean Power Alliance had not implemented that rate increase, then you would be having residential and small business customers, 99% of the users, they would have been subsidizing large users, including the city. So it would have been 99% subsidizing the 1%. And to me, that's not equitable nor fiscally prudent. Okay, so what do you do with that? Well, the city's a large user, just like the city's a large user, just like a lot of other large users. So we have to assess our own accounts. The potential hit to the city, if we keep the 108 accounts within the CPA, is in excess of $233,000 for fiscal year 2019-20, or almost $232,000 plus. To me, that doesn't make any sense to do that from a city's fiscal standpoint, nor to our ratepayers. I think the city should opt out of the affected rate classes, return the accounts to Edison. We can review the matter again next year when things settle down. If we take this action, it makes no difference with respect to the city's membership as a member of the Joint Powers Authority. So it's not going to impact our membership in any way. Am I happy about this whole circumstance? No, but it's reality due to a variety of circumstances, and which really are beyond the control of Clean Power Alliance. But in order to start talking about that, I'd have to really go down in the weeds, and you would not be happy with me about that. I will say one thing, and that one additional thing, and that to the folks who are listening tonight, our city residents, you are on unless you have picked a different tier, the City Council placed Camarillo residences and small business on a 36% default tier. You are paying 1 to 2% less than Edison's base rates right now, and that is a fact. So Camarillo is leaner and cleaner by virtue of having been in the Clean Power Alliance. What we are talking about tonight is only with respect to those large users, of which the city is one. So from a fiscal standpoint, I would suggest that we go ahead and opt out. And in fact, if it's okay with you, Mr. Mayor, I'll go ahead and make that motion.
Certainly.
Second. Other people.
Well, there you go. I would move.
might have
I'd move
comments,
this. I
though.
move this suggest. That's fine. I'll move this suggested staff action. And I think there was a second, Mr. Mayor, but I don't want to be presumptuous.
There is a second. Any further discussion on this? John, anybody have anything else to say? Please vote. That passes unanimously. Okay, so let's see. Counselor, we do have now, we've got a study session, but we do have a closed session. Would be appropriate to announce?
Yes, it would be. It's conference with real property negotiator. The authority is Government Code Section 54956.8. The property is the Camarillo Ranch at 201 Camarillo Ranch Road. The agency negotiators are listed in the agenda. Negotiating parties is the Camarillo Ranch Foundation Board. Under negotiation, lease, price, and terms of payment.
Okay, so with that, we are in recess.